afternoon, everyone. I'll do that one more time. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much. I used to be a cheerleader in high school, so that's why. My name is Basil Smikle. I'm the director of the public policy program here at Roosevelt House Public Policy Institute. For those who have not been here before, how many of you have not been in this building before? That's awesome. Welcome. You may not know this, but it is, and for those that have been here before, welcome back. This building and the building that sits next to it, they were the former home of Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt, if you did not know that. And if you notice, there are technically two mansions, one that Franklin and Eleanor lived in, and the other for Franklin's mother, Sarah. She was a doting mom and liked to check in on her son and her daughter-in-law from time to time, but it was a gift from her to them for their wedding. Should we all be so lucky to get the gift of a mansion or two at some point in our lives? But one of the reasons that I love working in this building so much is that on the second floor is the Roosevelt Library, where the New Deal was sketched out. And it is a fitting place for all of the work that we do in this building subsequent to they being in residence here, that we like to bring together individuals, groups, to think about policy, to think about big ideas, to think about how to move ourselves and the country forward. So I welcome all of you to this wonderful space. Thank you for being here. When I talked to Vivian and Chris earlier, and I'll introduce them more formally in a second, it was really important to think about and hold this conference at this moment in time, particularly in this building. I'm not old by any measure, as we were talking about our respective parents and thinking about life and the continuum thereof. I am not old by any means, but I remember in 1984 and 1988, when I was 12 and 16 respectively, watching Jesse Jackson on television and speaking in prime time at the Democratic National Convention, talking about wanting the party to be more reflective of the diversity of America, and thinking about the Rainbow Coalition and what that meant, that people that look like me, people that look like us, could come together around common themes, common ideas, common interests, and an opportunity to craft our common future. I think about those moments and that time in my life a lot these days, because our discourse is not so aspirational in many ways. That when you look at the polling that's being done today, what is coming in at the top 1, 2, or 3rd position are threats to our democracy. And as we think about what that means, I often say to people, it's not just our institutions. The democracy is us. It is the people that make up these institutions. It's the people that whose ideas and whose passions and whose emotions we need to tap into to really think through how we're going to move forward, particularly in this time. Because as we do think about institutions, one thing to reflect upon is that they're changing. And even though in some respects they may be doing what they're supposed to do, in others they are they're almost bursting at the seams. We're taxing them and asking them to do things that they were not designed to do. Sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes that's a bad thing, but it is something that is worth reflecting on, and it's something that is worthy of our study and our scrutiny. And that's why we're here today. How do we move forward? How do we use the time that we're in to move forward, to talk about collective engagement, collective activity, and the importance, among other things, of civic participation and engagement? And with that, again, I welcome you here to Roosevelt House and to Hunter College. We're delighted here in the Roosevelt House Public Policy Institute and the Public Policy Program specifically to partner with the Asian American Studies Center at Hunter College. And I'm really glad to have the Asian American Studies Program as a thought partner, as a public policy partner in this work. Something about Asian Americans as a growing and important voice in the political landscape is worth our time and our study. So I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Vivian Louie, who is Director of the Asian American Studies Program at Hunter College. And I'm happy to welcome her here in conversation with Chris Kwok, who also teaches Asian American Studies at Hunter in addition to his extensive activism and advocacy. So for all of you, welcome. Thank you for being a part of today's dialogue. And for Chris and Vivian, good luck to you on the work today, and welcome.
I'm always afraid I'm going to fall off.
They are a little high. Welcome, everyone. Can you all hear me? Okay, fantastic. So thank you so much, Dr. Smigel, for the wonderful introduction. Thank you to Roosevelt House, to Harold Holzer and his entire team, who are so amazing. And thank you, Chris, for bringing this to us today. So what I'm going to do just briefly is kind of have a conversation with Chris to set the stage for today's proceedings. And I'm going to start off by thanking the audience, both in person and on Zoom. And I'm also going to give a very quick primer on Asian Americans and why Asian American politics is so important. So the term Asian American or Asian American Pacific Islander describes a population that is incredibly diverse and fast growing in the United States. So 23 million Americans from more than 50 ethnic groups and more than 40 nations. In the United States, they make up about 7% of the population. They're also the most economically divided racial group in the United States. So this means that you have uptown Asians, right, tech entrepreneurs, physicians, and you also have downtown Asians who are folks working low-wage jobs and also might not have documentation status in the United States. In the city of New York, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders make up nearly 1 in 5 of New York City residents. Nearly 1 in 5. I think that's important to recognize. People of Chinese descent make up about half of that population. South Asians, this includes folks with ancestral roots in India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, they make up another 30%. But that economic divide is also with us here in New York City. So 45% of Chinese American New Yorkers live below 200% of the federal poverty level. 55% of Pakistanis and 58% of Bangladeshis. So this again is a very economically diverse population in New York City. And I wanted also just to say that this is just such a critical moment in our political sphere in the city and in the state. We'll talk more about it, but you know, after I would say decades of near invisibility, and we'll hear more from Chris about how we got here, we now have a record 5 Asian American Pacific Islander members of the New York City Council. Just a few years ago, there was no Asian American Pacific Islander representation in our state house. And today we have John Liu, we have Kevin Thomas, we have Jeremy Cooney, right? We also have members of the New York State Assembly. We have an unprecedented number of folks who are running for office. This includes Stephen Raga, who's running for an assembly seat, and if he wins, he would be the first Filipino American holding elected office in the state of New York. We have an unprecedented number of folks who are voting and also engaged in grassroots advocacy. So Chris, my question to you to kind of open us up is, you know, what brought you to this space? Why do you think this space is so important?
The journey for me began as a personal one, growing up as an immigrant from China, arriving into Flushing as a 5-year-old in 1979, the 4th of July. And so, you know, the education that I had was, that spoke to me was about race in America. Although, you know, taking those classes in the 80s and 90s in high school, it wasn't directly touching upon Asian Americans. But race in America was part of the story that I experienced. And as I got into college and had Asian American studies, you know, thankfully as a minor, that really opened up a world to me about studying about experiences that touched upon my own things that I could reflect on. And I worked in race, and I didn't do anything in the community for a good decade or more until the SHSAT issue in 2011, 2012, when I identified that as an issue that I thought really affected the immigrant community in New York that wasn't involved in the civic sphere or the public sphere and needed to have a certain representation in that dialogue. This was a very difficult issue because, well, you know, all these issues that revolve around race are difficult in our civic space, but I didn't hear that represented at all. So that brought me into the organizing space. And I think once I identified that, I knew that in my gut to be an issue, but it wasn't covered or perhaps represented in the way that I thought it deserved to be. And once I got involved, everything that I had been sort of preparing for brought that all to bear. And it was an intense sort of 8-year period in which we saw the issue really roil New York City and really, once again, be at the center of our race conversations. And it seemed like the biggest thing and the biggest deal. But quite honestly, it kind of laid the foundation for me for the anti-Asian hate, sort of COVID-19 anti-Asian hate, which I think has really changed everything. And once again, because it's the silver lining of that dark cloud is that formerly Asian Americans that were not politically active are now politically activated. Billionaires and billionaires who had more money than they could ever throw away all of a sudden said, actually, I need to be involved. I don't know how, but I should be. And there's tons of people getting into that square for the very first time. And there's a uniting thread, once again, a silver lining to a very dark cloud, that unites Koreans, Chinese, Filipinos, South Asians, that all of a sudden sort of their eyes open and they're saying, oh, I see how we're affected. How can we work together? And all these people are being affected. And that was new and critical because there was probably a lack of a unifying thread before that in many ways that really brought people to the town square.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's really thoughtful, and thank you for sharing that, Chris. I also wanted to add that the Asian American Federation, which is an organization based in New York City and founded by a Hunter alum, Kao O, and now led by Joanne Yu, had a terrific report that was released just this fall, basically finding that there was a historic turnout of Asian American voters in New York City in the 2021 mayoral primary, right? The highest it's ever been. So this is really groundbreaking in that sense. Just the fact, again, that folks are really becoming involved, some for the first time, but some going back to it, to the space as in your personal narrative. But also trying to engage in solidarity work, and I know that the next panel will really speak to that in different ways, in the sense of, because this is such an incredibly diverse group, right? Again, more than 50 ethnic groups, ancestral roots in more than 40 nations at the national level. And also the economic diversity, the linguistic diversity. You know, I'm Chinese American as well, but my kind of personal narrative is very different from Chris's. And that's neither good nor bad, it's just different. So my family have roots in the United States dating back to the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which really excluded large-scale labor immigration from China for so many years. Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking back to Jesse Jackson when he ran, and Professor Smike, mentioned that, and I wanted to draw that thread again because there's many threads that have been running within the Asian American community, but they've been separate from one another. And large-scale social upheaval is possible when those threads come together. So when Jesse Jackson ran, I was a precocious junior high schooler and I was watching the news. But the overall, I thought, mainstream view was this is nice, but it's not going to happen, Jesse. You're doing it to show you can do it, but you're never going to be president. Black man's never going to be president. People didn't say that, but that was the idea. That's what I got even from watching the news. But one of the important things that he did for the Asian American community, because he had a Rainbow Coalition, was that, all right, because the Rainbow Coalition includes Asians, what's your issue? And it was the organizing around Vincent Chin, the death of Vincent Chin in Detroit. And what had become a pretty big issue within the Asian American community, he had a press conference where he showed up and he brought that issue to national attention in a way that was really forgotten until recently, where we're like, oh, how did this become? Well, part of it was Jesse Jackson in his presidential run made it an issue. And this is something that I think we're going to return back to as an issue to remember, because it's easily forgotten. But I think now we look at Jesse Jackson's run at how important it was for Obama and for other Asian American communities in its wake. But I just wanted to sort of note that.
Yeah, and I also wanted to say, so I'm older, Ekos knows this. So I was a former journalist, and I remember covering a rally for the Reverend Jesse Jackson. And it was just amazing. It was amazing for me to meet him. He won't remember me, of course, but just to see him, right? The physical embodiment of diversity work, coalition building, of activism, of civic and political engagement on so many different levels. And I also wanted to just to let us all know that we have a new position that we're searching for, the Helen Zia Distinguished Lecturer in Asian American Studies at Hunter.
Speaking of Vincent Chin.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Who also serves as the deputy director, but take it about Helen Zia.
Right. Yeah, Helen Zia was so many things on her portfolio, but she was a journalist as well as a community organizer in Detroit, and became one of the spokespersons for Vincent Chin in the organizing in Detroit. One of the central sort of poles of the Asian American movement, through the 80s and 90s. But for much of that era, still sort of just within the Asian American community, except for that time with Jesse Jackson on the national stage. And so I see sort of pictures of ideas and periods where there's margins and mainstream and issues are moving out and moving in. And we're now in a time where the mainstream is focusing on Asian Americans and the issue in a way that I have not seen. And so I think it's a critical period for the Asian Americans that are coming into the public square to reflect, to learn, and to talk to one another.
Mm-hmm. And we're going to close this portion in just 1 minute. Okay, yep, I know. Thank you. Wonderful timekeeper here. And so as we're closing this portion, I wanted also to just highlight the work of Hunter College and the Asian American Studies program and center in this space. So the Asian American Studies program here at Hunter College is nearing its 30th year. And it's also the largest undergraduate program in the City University of New York. Our recently launched center does public programming like this, thanks to our amazing partners at Roosevelt House. And we also are home to HCAP, which is a federally supported partner to Asian American Studies, offering critical supports to Asian American students and all students. And so it really is a great time here as well at Hunter College in terms of visibility and in terms of working together.
And I'm so happy to be even part of the Hunter community. As I began to spend more time teaching here, I see Doris Lynn Cohen, Hunter alum, Sandra Ung, who will be speaking, Larry Lee, just really stalwarts in the Asian American community that have graduated from Hunter. And we really need to remember they've come through, and they're really just, there's so many more than that. So really proud to be part of that.
Absolutely. So I'm going to call the panelists to our stage, and we're going to move a little. Okay.
Well, welcome to our panelists. We have Rong Xiaoqin, who is a reporter, and we have John Albert, who is, I guess, a political consultant. Is that the right way to say it, or do you want? Okay,
That's fair.
and their bios are in the pamphlet, so I won't spend time doing that, except to say that they are some of the best people that I've encountered in this space. And without further ado, I'm going to ask each of them to speak a little bit about the journey that took them to where they are now, as well as give us a little insight on where they see the Asian American community now. So maybe I'll start with John and, take it away. You've got about 5 minutes.
Hi, everyone. I'm John Albert. One, I want to thank Dr. Louie and Chris for the invite and for Roosevelt House for hosting this conversation. I'm surprised that I'm here, more so because, I know some of the faces in the audience really are doing this work, and all of these folks. And so just to be invited to be in the front of the audience, it feels a little disconcerting, but hopefully what I'm about to talk about will help kind of bring our community together and help us together, move forward as a community. So for origin stories, it's really interesting because, how I got involved in activism was really because of my parents. I find it interesting that everyone here kind of spoke about their parents a little bit, and so you can check off that stereotypical Asian box of, recognizing your parents right off the bat. My parents moved from India in 1979 with me in tow and my brother. We were Tamil Christians, so we were already linguistic, racial, and ethnic minorities within India. And so we move into this sphere here in New York, where we're also minorities. But the great thing about my parents is it never slowed them down. They embraced America completely. They loved being Indians, but they loved being Americans as well. And so I think I see that throughout my work. And so this ability to kind of transcend both and be proud of both has really shaped me right from the beginning. They were all in on America. They bought a house in Queens, like many people afterwards. We were the first Indian family to move into what I would say is, the border of Jamaica, Queens, and Hollis, Queens. And many years later, people asked my dad, "Why'd you do that? There's no Indian people around." And he's always like, "This is where we can afford a house." And so that really shaped, I think, it shaped me, but also it really followed this kind of, trajectory for what mirrored Black home ownership in New York, right? So that also was really formative for me. Like I mentioned, my parents registered to vote. They voted regularly. I'd heard this term many years later, triple prime voters. They were those, they took it very seriously. And that all shaped, who I am and why I got engaged in community work. I'll say this about where we are, right, as a community, which is, I think we are in a great place. I feel like we are arriving at a time when America needs us, right? I feel like so much of the discourse is anti-democratic. And what we as a community is bringing to the table are some basic principles of debating issues, being active in the community, becoming citizens, voting, protesting when necessary, and just engaging democracy. So I feel like we are all in, just like my parents are all in. And I'm so glad to see that the community has moved forward in this way. I just, there are a couple of things that I want to hit on, and I wrote them down. I'm usually, when I'm sitting on a chair like this, I have a drink in my hand and not a mic. And so this is kind of odd for me. But I just wanted to, if I can just make sure that, my activism is kind of organic. I hate to even call it activism. I just responding to needs in the community. But I feel like a venue like this allowed me to put down some of my thoughts. And so these are some of the things that I feel like were threads in everything that I've been doing and the community has been doing. So one is trying to put away the prejudices of our homelands, right, in the old country. So creating new friendships and creating new communities here, right, maybe with people in India that we would not have associated with for various reasons, right? So it's bridging those differences. Here, also bridging those differences between first and second generation immigrants. I think that's important. I think it's important to coalesce around issues based on our community's needs and not your personal needs. And also to advocate for ourselves, and usually that means educating ourselves about lots of different issues, and then building coalitions with different community groups. And what I mean by that is and one example is, I think every American, every immigrant needs to really understand slavery and the role that slavery played in America. Because if we don't understand that, I think you just on, say, quote unquote, our work, you won't understand the civil rights movement, and you won't understand just the opening up of immigration that allowed us to come into this country. So I think that's really important. And finally, when we are in these tables, these diverse coalition building tables, how do we stand up for ourselves, right? So we're not just one in a chorus, but also demand accountability from the coalitions that we're a part of. So they're speaking about and speaking to us, right? But also speaking for us. I just want to say, I've said the word us and them and all of these things so often, but when I say Asians or us and them, I really mean Americans, right? This is a deeply American act, this conversation, and the work that we're all engaged in. So I thank you for the opportunity. I'm just giddy to be here. I don't know how to say that. As a 49-year-old person, can you be giddy? I am.
Thank you, John. And if I might, just before we move on to Rung, like so many thoughts, go through my head as you speak. People from the margins coming to the mainstream, holding the mainstream to its highest ideals and promises, some which have not been kept, but cannot be delayed any longer. So that's part of the refreshing of that stream is sort of what I see. Yeah.
I also wanted to just say quickly, building on John's fantastic comments, this is just the teacher in me, right? What you were saying about the civil rights movement and the critical role that the civil rights movement, civil rights activists played in the Immigration Act of 1965, which reopened large-scale immigration to the United States after more than 4 decades of a closed-door policy based on national origins quotas. I mean, that was so critical. It's what I teach, it's what Chris teaches in our classes in Asian American Studies and all the wonderful faculty we have here. But I think it's something that we need to remember. And one of the things that I always like to open in one of my classes is that so many of us would not be in this space, in this room together, were it not for the Civil Rights Movement and were it not for the Immigration Act of 1965.
And if I just one more thing, I mean, we are at war in this country still about how slavery is remembered and taught. And that is one of the things, one of the bigger political battles that we're in. I mean, I remember back to how I learned about slavery in junior high school and high school, where most of us will encounter that. And it was just kind of like it happened and then now it's in the past. That's my memory of it. The implications, the larger scale, economic, cultural, political implications were not well taught in the era that I went to school. But with that, want to turn over to Rong, who is a reporter and writes and speaks Chinese, so is connected to the Chinese community, but writes in English as well for all of us. So Rong, I'm going to turn it to you.
Hello, hi, everyone. John said something that we should build communication between generations. I completely agree. But do we have to start with our parents? No. I'll start with my own experience. I have been covering the Asian Chinese community for 20 years so far. And in the recent few years, what really caught my eyes is the quickly awakening of political awareness among new immigrants from China. Before 2015, this group was basically silent. The voices from the Asian community or the Chinese community were mainly dominated by the English-speaking second-generation Asians or the older generation Chinese who came here very early. So the voices at that time were quite unified. They were basically in line with the progressive doctrine. But then what happened at the end of 2014 changed everything. At that time, there was a cop called Peter Liang, rookie cop. He accidentally shot dead an innocent African-American Arcad Gurley while he was patrolling at government housing in Brooklyn. So Liang was indicted right after the incident. If you remember that period of time, before Liang, there were several incidents where white cops caused the death of black people while they were on duty, but they were let go. They were not indicted. So Liang's indictment indeed triggered some, anger from this community. They were not saying that Liang did something right, but they were saying that, now here's the Chinese who were taken as scapegoat to ease the tension between the cops and the minority communities. So a lot of Asian people and Chinese, they went on the street to protest against this, not only in New York, but many other American cities as well. That was the first time I saw the fissure of political views within this community. Margaret Chen, who was the council member representing Chinatown at that time, she's of course progressive person, and she was the first one who issued a statement calling for the indictment of Peter Liang. So Margaret immediately became a target of attacks from the community. People are saying, you've betrayed your own community and you shouldn't say that. Why did you help them? But I talked to both sides. I understand why Margaret did what she did. She think it was the unfairness of the system that caused the harm to every one of us, like Black, Latino, and Asian Chinese. And she thought it's not like Peter Liang shouldn't be indicted, but it's like the white cops before him should have been indicted too. So she thought during the process of the trial, the flaws of the system could be highlighted, so people will realize that. But on the other hand, the Asians and Chinese who were against this indictment were saying, okay, I don't want to wait for you guys to fix the system because it might take forever. I just want to fight for the unfair treatment to my people immediately. So that was the conflict. And I can see from then on, these conflict of mindsets actually has taken over of all the political activities that the Chinese community was involved since then. If you look at 2018, the specialized high school reform, there were so many of Chinese parents went on the street and saying this reform is gonna like shortchange our interest for the interest of people from other minority communities and for the racial balance that the city was seeking to reach. 2018 was also the year when Senator Zhang Liu, he's the state senator now, when Zhang Liu was running against Tony Avila, the incumbent at that time. In the summer 2018, there were a group of Chinese immigrants, like more than 200 of them, gathered at a venue in Flushing to do a fundraising for Tony Avila. That was such a surprise because, you know, Zhang Liu was such a like political rock star in the community. Nobody could imagine at that time someone from our own community would stand up against Zhang Liu. The reason these people were against Zhang Liu was that the senator, when he was the city comptroller, he actually called for specialized high school reform. So that was the reason they were against him. And I don't think Senator Liu was worried at that time because we all know that these people, these more than 200 people who were at that venue, many of them were not citizens. They couldn't vote. But that was then. You know, that was like when the parents that I met on the street who came out to protest against the specialized high school reform, many of them were not citizens at that time. They didn't even know who the governor was, and they didn't even know the differences between the state assembly and the state senate. But now, some of them, you know, many of them have already become citizens. Not only that, some of them have started to run the school boards, the district leaders, and the city council. So they have quickly picked it up. And during this process, the idea that Chinese or Asians are mistreated in this country, we have to fight for ourselves, is like getting even a firmer foothold in this community. And if you look at the recent redistricting process and the residents in Sunset Park, they really like trying to fight hard to protect the District 48, which is in the July, the original map that the committee released in July.
Why don't we save that? Because I've got a question for that, so we'll
sure.
return to that.
Yeah, sure.
But thank you so much.
Yeah.
You know, and that's a great sort of landscape of the last 7 or 8 years, which even before COVID-19, there have been sort of huge pockets bubbling up. But COVID-19 really turbocharged a lot of that. And I want to welcome Trip Yang just in time. Trip, thanks for joining us. The question, you know, that the John and Rong have already answered is just the beginning. Tell us how you got here, into what you're doing now as a political consultant, and also where you see the Asian American community or some of the big issues facing the Asian American community right now.
Thank you so much, Chris. And just make sure this is on. Thank you so much, Chris and Vivian, you know, for hosting this event. Thanks for everyone for your patience as I'm navigating the train system coming from Brooklyn. But to introduce myself, my name is Trip Yang. I run a political consulting and paid media strategy firm. We average about 10 to 12 electoral candidates a year, some issue advocacy candidates. I've been doing political campaigns professionally for over a decade. Done 3 presidential cycles from Obama 2012 to Bernie 2020. Locally, I've done a lot of races, including you know, Tish James's senior advisor when she first ran and won for Attorney General, Jumaane Williams' campaign manager when he first won public advocate. And you know, as a consultant, we've done a lot of races, but I'm actually particularly keen in this type of conversation because some of the most memorable races have been with Asian American API candidates. I actually was Margaret Chin's campaign manager a decade ago in 2013 when that year she won re-election by double digits, and we had folks like Andrew Yang that we consulted for when he ran for mayor last year. So these topics are of great interest to me personally and professionally. You know, I got involved at my start because, you know, I studied economics and I thought I was gonna work in finance, and my father works in finance. And you know, when I graduated from college, something about that type of industry wasn't really clicking for me. So I got involved locally. There was a presidential re-election happening. This is 2011, going into the very beginning of 2012. I wanted to try this out, got to meet new people, did the whole volunteer, unpaid internship for 50 hours a week type of thing. And then the Obama campaign gave me a full-time job with benefits, and I thought I made it, and I become this big star, and I didn't realize it was for something like $2,800 a month for 80 hours a week, talking to voters. But at the time, I thought it was a big deal, and I caught the bug, and as I've grown in my career, one thing that that is particularly resonant with me and that I care about is that when I was coming up, there were very, very few Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders doing this type of political work. And I will say there were very few African American and Black Americans doing this type of work, very few Latino Americans, very few Muslim Americans, very few women doing this type of work in general. But when I was first climbing the ladder, one of the things I always wanted in my career was to have the ability to have an Asian American mentor. Over a decade later, I've been able to meet and talk to some very insightful folks. But when I look at it from a big picture, is that it is so important for folks who don't normally do this type of work to do this type of work and be successful and to be supported as they grow in their career, because mentorship is very important and representation is very important, and people need to see that there are others who look like them, who can be successful, and who can work through failure, so that they can consider something like politics, which for many in our communities is an unconventional career choice. So I'll end my section right there and kick it back to Chris.
Thank you, Trip. And there's so much I want to pick up on, but I'm going to go back to Rung, because Rung was talking about one of the big issues in the last couple of months has been the redistricting for New York City Council. Every census, there's a whole round of redistricting that happens. And what redistricting does is really raise a whole bunch of conversations about how to divvy up the political landscape, right? And just to give you an interesting, I think, aside as a context, before I give it back to Rung, the Peter Liang protests was organized by a restaurant owner, a local community business person, John Chan, who doesn't speak English sort of very well, so he's only operating in Chinese, and he put together the protest in Brooklyn. I think over, 20,000 people showed up. People didn't expect it to be that big. So it became a political juggernaut in terms of community organizing and kind of power, right, for lack of a better word. Instantly, he had a platform. In a way that I don't think he even sort of had experience. He owns a large restaurant, Sunset Park, that's Brooklyn's Chinatown, which didn't exist 25 years ago for the most part, but has gone from zero to huge in 20 years. And so he's also was one of the voices in the redistricting. But Rung, I think you were beginning to talk about some of the fault lines there, and I want to give that back to you.
Yeah, I think the same mindset as we have to fight for ourselves, not anyone else but ourselves. That is reflected very clearly during the redistricting. In Sunset Park, people are fighting for District 43 in the original map, which was released in July, which kind of cut Sunset Park into parts, separated the Latino voters and Asian voters in Sunset Park, and combined the Asian voters with the Asians in the surrounding area into this District 43. And this is an Asian majority district, and the Asians in Sunset Park think this is the opportunity they have been waiting for a long time to elect their own representative. By saying their own representative, they're trying to form an Asian majority district, not to elect a Latino representative. They meant to elect an Asian representative. I think, on one hand, I understand why people are trying to do that, because they feel like their needs, especially along 8th Avenue where the Chinese are concentrated, that's different from the further avenues where more are mainly Latinos. So the issues on 8th Avenue, including illegal vendors, the occupied streets and the sanitation issues, that has been around for a long time. It's not solved at all, and they feel like their needs are overlooked. But on the other hand, when we talk about solidarity, we talk about like minorities, we should work together for our general interest. While you have a process like the redistricting, where you have to think for your own interest, you have to be trying to be staying in the same district with your own people. This is actually put the racialized idea into people's mind that only our people can represent us. So I feel like this is two forces that trying to drag us into different directions.
Any comments about that race from John or Trip? In terms of where the fault lines were where we're falling? Because you sort of had the traditional Asian American groups wanting the coalition sort of like, it's okay to give up a little power because it's overall, versus the, let's call it the post-65 generation, drawing very broad strokes, like we've got to focus on our own power and our interests.
I mean, I just want to pick up on that last thread. It's so interesting to me because one of the things that as activists, anybody organizing in the community, we're always asked, why are you organizing just your community, right? And in the context of redistricting, what you said is so important. We are given the playing field. The playing field was gerrymandered, and the elected officials were not picked, but their path was laid because they were either black or white or some other race. So when we come along and say the same things about our neighborhoods, we're assailed. We're saying, oh, don't you believe in diversity? Oh, and so this kind of context, I think what you said is so important. And so that really was a springboard for a lot of the work that, the Asian American and the South Asian American community engaged in. Because first we had to go on the defensive. We have to explain that we have to advocate for ourselves. We had to coalesce around our own neighborhoods. And this is not anti-American, anti-diversity, right? We want to educate ourselves and organize so we're an equal footing, right? We're not asking for anything extra. So that point that you made, it's so important to all of this work. So,
Yeah, absolutely. I live in Council District 38 in Sunset Park. That is, part of it will be redistricted. That district is currently represented by Alexa Vilas. It's over 30% Latino, 30% Asian American. So, there'll be some changes in that district. So I'll get to that in a second. But the first part, and that Chris, you mentioned this a couple minutes ago, that the 2014 shooting of Akai Gurley by then police officer Peter Liang was something that I remember very vividly, because at the time in my political career, I was working in the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office, and this happened in the Pink Houses, East New York. I had worked for Ken Thompson, Brooklyn's first black district attorney at the time, the late, great Ken Thompson, who has since passed away a couple years ago. Part of my responsibilities in that office at the time was to work in intergovernmental affairs and community affairs and to represent the policies of the office to the Asian American community in Brooklyn, which is 10% and growing. Was 10% back then and growing, and even more so today. It was a seminal moment in terms of organizing for Asian Americans, because I believe that in the last 10 years in New York, the Asian American population, which is close to 18% of our city's population, the two seminal moments were organizing around the SHSAT and, frankly, organizing around the then de Blasio administration's efforts to repeal the SHSAT, as well as the Peter Liang, Akai Gurley shooting incident. I do vividly remember that episode. There were a lot of Asian Americans who got civically involved who previously weren't involved. That was a little bit of a fraught time, in my opinion, between some of Brooklyn's black communities and Asian communities. And the sense I'll just say about it is that it is important to, I think it's important to advocate for the context of your community. At the same time, you also have to understand the hurt from another community at the same time. And I think in the heat of moments like that, some of the nuance gets lost. But I don't want to take up too much time, so I'll just talk a little bit briefly about the redistricting. Currently in Brooklyn, there's somewhere around 15, 16 council seats. The Asian American population is over 10% of Brooklyn. So just by equity, there should be at least one seat that is plurality or majority Asian American that is represented by an Asian American. I think a lot of people will understand that is fair. I also think in the long term, all of our communities could probably grow and get to a better positioning from representation, from resources, from city and state and federal funding, et cetera, if we work collaboratively. There are moments where we have to have tough conversations amongst each other, and that is okay. But I do think collaboratively we can get further along. And one thing I'll just say is that there are 51 council districts in New York City. Each council district represents somewhere, I believe, 170, 180,000 constituents. I probably think you should grow the number of council seats just because of the population of our city has grown. So that maybe we should have 60, 65, 70 council members, and we can have more diverse representation, including more diverse Asian American representation.
Without having to fight over the scraps, so to speak. And I think one of the important things I hear from this conversation is context is important as we enter into a space. A lot of the city council and any district, whether it be New York State government, New York City government, highly racialized, highly gerrymandered, meant to keep out certain groups, meant for political machines to deliver a candidate. And we're coming into that space, and we're trying to play by the rules of the game which are highly, highly problematic.
So I'm just going to mix it up a little. It's just my role. So how do, I mean, I think this is such an important conversation. How do we change the rules of the game then? And then how do we, have coalition building, have solidarity to do this? Because again, I'm probably the oldest person on this panel. But I remember, the tensions in Brooklyn back in the 80s, I believe it was, between Korean immigrant greengrocers and Haitian Americans, right? Haitian immigrants and their children during that time. I remember, of course, the Los Angeles, riot, uprising, rebellion. I mean, we can choose what term to call it. I had just left Los Angeles as a journalist, had moved back to the East Coast. To be frank, I wasn't surprised. I wasn't surprised because as a New Yorker, I had never gotten to learn how to drive till I moved out to the West. And for my job as a reporter, I had to have a driver's license and I had to have a car. But I delayed getting my car to the last possible moment. And so I took the bus in Los Angeles. And I realized who takes the bus in Los Angeles in 1990, it's folks who can't afford a car. And I realized when I was there, sitting on the bus with folks who were predominantly, almost all people of color, and poor, and really looked hungry, to be honest about it. And then I realized once I got the car and got into the car, I never had to see this. So I'm just curious about how do we change the rules of the game? What does that look like?
If I can take that. It's a great observation. One of the ways that we started, right, within the South Asian community is not only educating people about redistricting, but we asked them to take a real look at who their neighbors are, right? And so if you were to go to Richmond Hill or South Ozone Park, these are noticeably South Asian communities. There's an enormous Indo-Caribbean population there that's been there for 40 years, a Sikh population that's been there maybe 30 years, and a newer Bangladeshi population. If you ask folks, right, who lives there, they would say it's 100% South Asian. That's not the case. It's maybe 60% South Asian and 40% Latino. Everybody's brown, but not the same kind of brown. And so when we went to organize the communities, we explained to folks, right, that to have a more inclusive message, to understand where the Latino communities were. And then when you're looking to draw lines, for every, 6 South Asians you're going to capture 4 Latinos. So why not work in coalition with folks, particularly if neither of you have a voice in the neighborhood, right? It's not as though somehow the, quote unquote, historical white elected official was so responsive to the Latinos and not responsive exclusively to the South Asians. That person was not responsive to anybody. So I think this kind of coalition building, understanding who your neighbors are, is really important. And we began there. Sometimes it's just letting people know and building community in a very simple way and meeting neighbors. And then things will start organically.
I'll just add to that a little bit. Broad, long-term systemic change will not happen overnight, and I do think involves a lot of different steps to it. I often view politics and government and advocacy, it has an ecosystem to it. There are elected officials. There's 51 council members, 150 assembly members, 63 state senators in New York, right? There is a massive bureaucracy. In the city of New York alone, we have over 300,000 employees. There's the state, the state government, et cetera. There is the political infrastructure of people who work professionally on campaigns, people who are consultants, people who do great lobbying advocacy work like John, people who volunteer and are hobbyists in politics. There is an ecosystem. At every stage of the ecosystem, you have to have people who represent diverse backgrounds, but also have diverse viewpoints. I don't think it's enough just to have an Asian American who works in the space who doesn't understand there's Asian American issues and doesn't understand that the rate of poverty for Asian New Yorkers is very high, for example. Running for office is very important, and we have seen enormous progress in Asian and South Asian communities since John Liu in 2001 was the first Asian American elected official. But not everyone is going to win elected office, and frankly, that's not for everyone to make their biggest impact. It's important to have Asian Americans at high levels of city government and state government, where sometimes they have more power than a rank and file legislator. There needs to be more Asian American, EDs and chairs of nonprofits, more Asian Americans who wield political influence in this ecosystem, and the pipeline of people who are going from interns to entry-level staff to mid-level staff to upper management to, kind of that executive branch. So, I would say this of every community, it's important to have your perspectives and your needs represented in all the various assets of this, facets of this ecosystem.
I think John and Trip both said very well. If I could just add one more thing, I think in order to build a coalition, maybe we should also figure out a way to talk about the tension between different groups in a constructive way. Because Vivian, you mentioned the LA riots, the Brooklyn conflicts. I have been thinking a lot about those things during the anti-Asian hate crimes and the waves. During like the high-profile anti-Asian attacks, some of the cases, the perpetrators are from other minority groups. And if you look at WeChat, which is like a dominant social media platform for Chinese, those people are talking about like, oh, it's all black people attacking us. It's all like we're bullied by black people, which is not true. Not all of the perpetrators are black, but some of them are. And the mainstream media turn their heads away. They don't even mention, when they cover things like that, they don't even mention the race or racial background of the attackers. But the thing is, if you don't talk about it, and the misunderstanding or misinformation on WeChat is still there. And so I was thinking, let's not wait until one day when something like LA riots happened, you're like, oh, we're so surprised at where all this come from. And one thing I want to just share with you guys that last summer, there was an event in Chinatown hosted by the Union 1199, and a lot of Chinese community leaders and black community leaders, they were all there. the most powerful line I heard, not only then, but for a long time, was from Al Sharpton. He was saying, he stood on the stage and said, the reason we're here is because we want to show the Chinese people we're together with you guys. And I know some of the attackers in these Asian attack cases are from our community. I just want to let you guys know that they don't represent us. And also I want to share with you this thought that we minorities are just like a formation of the geese. Sometimes it's the Black people who leading the whole formation, and so the leading goose has to take all the bronto of the brutality of the weather. And then when he feels tired, he goes to the end of the formation, and some other people will lead the whole formation. That could be Latino, that could be Asian. But we still all belong to the same formation. I think that's a very honest and very powerful line. That's an effective line.
Yeah, just to give, once again, thank you for all those comments. Los Angeles and the Korean American population in particular, the LA riots is a very deep wound for the West Coast, Angelino in particular. Not exactly the same, although we had the tensions in New York City, and I remember the Red Apple, sort of boycott. It was not nearly as deep. We did not have that explosion of the LA riots. And it's not because we were so much better, it just was what happened in Los Angeles. K-Town was built in a Mexican and Black neighborhood. It's still there. And so the tensions, you can't get away from it. It's just still there today, it's still bubbling up. In New York City today, in the 80s and 90s, it seemed like every deli was run by a Korean mom and dad, and every newsstand was run by an Indian guy. That is, for the most part, no longer the case. I mean, now I go into a Korean deli and I see a Korean dad and mom, I'm like, oh, you're still here. But that era seemed to have passed, because that was the flashpoint for many. So there's sort of like generational moves. The 65 immigrants in New York City, had a certain sort of, their children grew up, went to college, they're done. Done with the deli, done with the dry cleaner, their job is done, right? So there's certain things that are different. But what's similar is that in LA and in Los Angeles, the Korean American population have been trying to work through that trauma with the African American population since then. They're still doing it. It's a big issue. It's difficult. I have talked to Angela Oh and the other leaders coming out of Los Angeles and California, and they kind of have to get fairly metaphysical and sort of religious, and in terms of just dealing with that conflict. Because even in the general society, we talk about the LA riots as a Black versus Korean or Black versus Asian. But what we miss in remembering that it was about white supremacy and what it was about those issues. So that's the sleight of hand that often we miss, I think, when we talk about these issues. And I think I like not given the hand that we're played and playing that hand. Like if we're given one pie and say you gotta divide it, say, let's bake some more pies. Let's bake some more city councils. Like that's to me the context we need to understand, is to not necessarily work with the rules we're being given, but think of new rules that can work better for the population that we are now, not the people that we once were.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that, I'm glad you brought up, Chris, the work that's been done in Los Angeles since the riots, because between the Black and the Korean American communities, because I think it's been so important, and it's been unsung, right, in the mass media. In the media, it's the conflict, right? It's those images of conflict. And in the media, it is also, as you say, what's unsung is the protection of the upper middle class and wealthy white communities. It's not just race, but it's race and class. It's race and socioeconomic status. During the riots as well. And I think what's also important to understand, and this builds on John's point about getting to know your neighbors, right? You were talking about that in Richmond Hill. And I think that is so critical. And the role of policy, the role of lawmakers, right, of people who hold the levers of power and funding. So I wrote a very short piece in 2021 that was 250 plus great ideas published by the Center for an Urban Future. And one of the ideas that I pitched, I'm raising it now because I think it's relevant, was that these wonderful nonprofits, community-based organizations across all these different zip codes. Let's face it, New York City is a residentially segregated city. I mean, that's just a fact, okay? So people across different zip codes don't often get together. People in the same zip code, as John was saying, don't often get together. So why don't we incentivize, why isn't there funding provided to these community nonprofits in different zip codes to hold events, right? Learning dialogues and learning communities with one another. Don't ask them to do it on the budgets they already have, because they're stretched so thinly already. You have to provide additional funding and guidance to do it.
Thank you. And so I think that was really rich, and but maybe we can sort of return to it later. But and we have touched upon the SHSAT, which Tripp had sort of mentioned as one of the signal sort of events in the last decade, let's say. And I just want to be upfront with everyone here that I was a part of that, and I helped bring that issue. So as I talk about it, I just want to be upfront. And as a progressive, and I consider myself as a progressive, defending the SHSAT was something that I had to deal with internally. Is it okay? Is it okay to do this issue? And it was a challenge, and talking about race in the public as an Asian American is very difficult. And so I just kind of wanted to give those kind of contextual sort of, and now the battle was won. De Blasio lost on the reform. But the battle has been continued about gifted and talented programs and about screens to enter into high school. These are not exams, but screens. But they're over very much the same issues. So I want to give it to our panelists to talk about this ongoing issue, but slightly different now.
I was thinking about the SHSAT, and while you were talking, Chris, I was, the whole thing like reflashed in my mind. I feel there were a lot of turns in the middle of the process where if the city could do something just slightly different, things won't be as bad as that. The Asian community would not be just so relentlessly, they will still fight against the reform, but the relationship between the Asian community and the city won't get to that freezing point. I think people, of course, they don't like you taking away of the SHSAT, but I think what made them really more angry is that the city trying to portray these people, the Asian parents, as rich, rich families who have extra money to send their kids to cram schools in order to prepare for the tests. That's really not true. The people, parents I talk to, they they worked in restaurants, and they pinched pennies in order to send their kids. Some of them do send their kids to cram schools, and the reason, also part of the reason, is they don't even speak English. They don't know how to help their kids to understand the questions, the problem, the tests. So I think that's really you have to blame the de Blasio administration. And then now the fight for the gifted and talented and screened schools, I think the fight is continuing, but I can see that the current administration at least are trying to communicate with the community and trying to sending out some message that, we understand where you come from. So I can see the fight was it's still going on, but it's not as bad as back then. So I think that's an improvement.
So you know, in the same way we can bake more city council seats, we can bake more specialized high schools. So I think our community has been given a false choice, right? We're pitted against a lack of investment. We're pitted against other minority communities. And, you know, I just want to, like, acknowledge that the Black community has been underserved, that's the word I can come up with, by the city's education system for generations. We should all be outraged, not only on their behalf, as just as regular taxpayers, saying, why are their communities consistently left behind? We have to acknowledge that, right? Our role in this is maybe different than this kind of, you know, the white perspective or the Black perspective or something, but something different, right? Saying we want to focus on quality. And maybe, right, what I began with is we are bringing a different perspective to the discourse, and not about, you know, Black, white, Asian, but just what does a good education look like? And within a good education system, maybe you make allowances for people who excel. And everyone should have access to those kinds of schools. We just don't get rid of these schools because, you know, it doesn't, you know, it looks unseemly or it's difficult to engage with. These schools, right, they're great schools. I went to one, I went to Brooklyn Tech, class of 90s. I could tell you I was 49 or 50 or whatever, right? And so, I know, and I know Chris likes to cough because I think you went to another school. It's just, there's a real cough, but it's but, you know, just 2 points on this in terms of like building allies. One of the things that our group did was to hold a pro-SHSAT rally in Queens. Most of the events were in Brooklyn and in downtown Manhattan. And I have to tell you, it was just such a, you know, good turnout, all of these things. But a woman who was Chinese American, didn't really speak English well. She came and hugged my wife, who was just off to the side because my wife doesn't really get in front of these things, and just said, and this woman had told my wife, she couldn't believe another community would stand up with the Chinese American community. She couldn't believe it. And I was like, how sad for our society that somebody feels this way, right? And so I feel like within this debate, we've kind of lost track of like what's really happening. I feel like government can invest in these schools, can invest in kids who are excelling, can invest in kids who are falling behind. We have the money, we just need the political will, and maybe it's our community that points that out to them.
Rong and John said some excellent remarks on this subject. So I'll just add by saying the entire debate about SHSAT during the de Blasio administration was a red herring. 3% of New York City's public school system is served by these SHSAT schools. The remaining 97%, in many instances and many zip codes, as John said, these students are just not getting an adequate education. That is a problem of government investment. That's a problem of how some of our public leaders of the past have thought about the issue. But that's 97% is the system is crumbling. And, you know, maybe in a way to divert perhaps from frankly, you know, the lack of standards in the past of the public school system in New York, you know, some of our leaders, including our former mayor, decided to pit different communities against each other for this 3% of these SHSAT school seats. And mind you, the 3 schools at the center of this controversy, Bronx Science, Brooklyn Tech, Stuyvesant, you needed the state of New York to actually repeal it. It wasn't a city issue. And so I think regardless of what side folks were on, you know, during the de Blasio administration's fight to repeal it, I think most folks can have come to the conclusion that the former mayor handled this issue incredibly poorly. But I agree with what John said about this is an issue of increasing opportunity. You know, the public school system has been failing many students for a very long time. It is not all on the city of New York. You know, there needs to be federal and state, you know, action and investment involvement as well. You know, but this issue was just completely misguided, and I'm hoping that, in the years to come, our public leaders will serve us better on education.
Yeah, I mean, de Blasio came to office in part because he was a super progressive, but he had an African-American son. And we all remember the commercial that essentially rocketed him from relative obscurity in the race to winning the New York City mayor's race. And my assessment after sort of doing the SHSAT was that he did not understand nor care to understand where Asians were and how they fit within the racial landscape. He essentially saw them as white, and because he thought he was an expert. He really did. And I had a chance to tell this to his face in a nice way. And he kind of nodded his head, and I was like, I don't think he understands when I say you really have to understand where the Asian population is coming from. And I was like, okay, so it's partly his fault. It's partly our fault, because we're not engaged in the square to let him know. But it's also his fault, because he's like, you're something different? You're just privileged, aren't you? And pretty much white, right? I mean, he's not articulating these things. I'm putting these words into his heads, and I told him nicely. And he paid for it. There's one things among many that sort of made the city tired of de Blasio. And Eric Adams was supporting his reforms at the beginning. And then as he saw the reaction, the full-throated reaction from the community, he really was like, I don't have to fight you on this. I'll come with something else. So he's been engaging the community. They're not happy with everything, but he's engaged in a way that de Blasio failed to do. And so that's really the difference. But I'll say that the community that came out and are still doing it are very conservative. They really, they really don't care about sort of, most of the race history. They're focused very, very squarely on education and what they see as the important part of education. Just do well, go to a good college, and by the way, get rid of affirmative action. That really is that sort of swing of the newly active. And that's not, sort of negative or positive, just by way of description as to sort of where that wave is headed, both at a national and sort of New York City level.
Yeah, and thank you so much. And one thing I just wanted to add to the conversation, again, forgive me, it's the teacher in me, is that, in fact, the specialized high schools, Brooklyn Tech, for example, right, at one point in its historical record was about 50%, close to 50% African American. Okay.
More, I would say, when I went there from 86 to 90, it was probably 65 to 70% maybe.
So there is, as a former journalist, I'm also pretty hard on my former industry. So, during the time that all of this was going on, for the most part, I was up in Boston, working and living. And so I got the national edition of the New York Times, not the Metro, so you don't get the Metro section. So I wasn't really kind of aware on a deep level. But then when I moved back, it really did irritate me. As a consumer of the mass media, that it was almost like taken for granted that there were never any African Americans and Latinos in the specialized high schools. Like, what's up with that, right? That you could get that impression. And then finally, the New York Times published a graphic, which is still there, right? An animated graphic where you can actually look at the line, right? The racial and ethnic composition of the students in the 3 specialized high schools, Brooklyn Tech, Bronx Science, and Stuyvesant. And you can see the decline over time, and it is really appalling. And it's appalling, as someone, as a consumer of the mass media, and now, of course, back in New York City paying my taxes, thinking, where were the policymakers? They didn't see the lines? I mean, they didn't care, or what was going on? Why do you have to wait till it's like, what is it now, 1%, 5%? I mean, this is not rocket science. And then one thing I did want to say, because it touches upon what has already been raised, but about identity politics, right? That hasn't, or representational identity or representational politics. I attended one of the for the mayor's race, the recent mayor's race in New York City, one of the virtual candidate forums. I think it may have been the League of Asian American New Yorkers, I'm not quite sure. But anyway, I attended it, and Eric Adams was then the candidate. And he said, and Andrew Yang, forgive me, Trip, Andrew Yang was one of the leading candidates at that time. And Eric Adams said, and I'm going to paraphrase it, right? He was the candidate at that time. And he said, you know, who are you going to vote for? I understand that you want to vote for people who may look like you, but I ask you to consider voting for someone who's been there for you. I'm paraphrasing, but it was very moving. I felt that he just was straight up about it. He called it out, and he addressed it.
And, you know, I remember that moment too. And Eric Adams ran a really good race because he came from Brooklyn. He really spent a lot of time, you know, with that community, building that, listening, changing his positions in response to things that he had heard. One of the things I want to pick out is about the mass media and about the racial images that we have through the mass media as a thread line I want to pull into our next topic about anti-Asian hate. And this is anecdotal on my part, but, you know, the mass media and Facebook and social media for anti-Asian hate, very much the narrative of a black attacker and Asian victims. There's very much. But I remember there was cases I focused on in Queens, in Forest Hills. Remember the person that killed the Chinese food delivery person. People call it the duck sauce killer, but I don't like to, because it's a focus on the duck sauce to make light of his death, right? But the killer was a white person. He was Jewish, right? But I remember I was watching the news, and I was like, why don't I see this guy's face or his mugshot on every single thing? I just don't. Like, I'm looking for his face, but often, and this is Channel 2, Channel 4, Channel 7, I mean, if it's a black person or Latino, I see some terrible mugshot, or I see the perp walk, and it's like really public. And I'm like, these are, you know, not left or right sort of like, you know, uses of race. It's just sort of there or not there. And I was like, am I watching this or am I not? Like, what am I being told? You know, and I mean, for me, it's just anecdotal. Perhaps there could be a more systemic study about how, because quite honestly, if it's black versus Asian, then it's not a white supremacy problem, right? Once again, we're going back to the Los Angeles riots, you know, and it's operating on a really almost like subconscious level that I have to be very conscious about not falling into. Yeah.
I want to just address what Chris said, but a couple minutes ago, Vivian talked a little bit about identity politics and its role in its relation to electoral politics. I think identity politics, in a large part, is a positive thing. You know, it's part of the reason why we have a renaissance of black political power in New York, and I think that's a good thing, right? Our Attorney General is black, our leader of the state Senate, state assembly, city council, you know, our public advocate, numerous of our most influential members of Congress are African American, Caribbean, et cetera. I think it's a largely good thing, right? We've also seen electorally from results, and also in a lot of the polling work that we've seen as part of our political work, you know, like black New Yorkers, there's a huge appeal to vote for black candidates. Same thing with Latino New Yorkers and Latino candidates. Same thing with Asian candidates, Asian voters to Asian candidates. Andrew Yang, for you know, all of his positives and also his challenges as a mayoral candidate, he spiked up Asian American turnout. Asian American turnout usually is about 5 to 6% of the Democratic primary electorate, even though the population is something like 18%, right? Vastly, you know, Asian Americans, Asian New Yorkers, Latino New Yorkers vote at significantly smaller rates than black New Yorkers and white New Yorkers. There's a lot of reasons for that. But, you know, Andrew Yang, when he ran, the Asian American turnout in June 2021 was about 10% of the electorate. He spiked it. And he won that community's vote overwhelmingly. And I think it's a positive impact, because then down ballot, you get a record number of Asian American city council members. I believe 6 of the 51 council members right now identify as fully AAPI or partially AAPI. And so identity politics can be a very powerful mover to get representation. At the same time, I think the best political and public leaders balance that need for identity politics and representation with their ability to coalition build. And I think there's some great examples of that. You know, John Liu, when he ran in 2009 for comptroller and he won, he was the first non-white, non-black individual in New York to win citywide office. And you know, he brought together a coalition of progressives and black and Latino and Asian New Yorkers, behind his historic victory. So I think there's nuance behind that. And then just to Chris's point a little bit about how the media views Asian American hate crimes the last couple of years, I am also a little bit disheartened because, you know, the narrative, of course, that one individual could represent hundreds of thousands of folks or several million folks of a demographic, that is incredibly disheartening and incredibly irresponsible. And the code words and the code language on that is very irresponsible. I will also say, and I use my mother as an example for this. You know, my mom immigrated here as a young adult. She has struggled to, you know, integrate into, you know, mainstream American society. She struggles speaking English. When I visit her and we have conversations, she's always worrying about my safety. You know, crime rates going up in New York, et cetera. You know, I'm very sympathetic to where my mom is coming from. And she'll talk about, you know, because she sees this in the Chinese media, in the English media, this type of narrative that it is black New Yorkers or black Americans committing these hate crimes and Asian Americans. Breaks my heart on a number of levels. Both what I said earlier, but also I have to, I am a very left-wing person myself in a number of ways, but I have to remind myself to be patient with folks like my mom who are of a different generation. And I have to have restraint and have a constructive conversation, or try to have a constructive conversation in my broken Chinglish with her, in that, you know, you don't have to be white to engage in acts of white supremacy, and that's where these hate crimes, you know, come from.
And that's a really difficult sort of, because our parents, because my mom and dad, I love them the same, they're not racialized in the same way. That doesn't make them inferior. They just don't go through the same process of racialization that we go through in America, either implicit or explicit, mostly implicit, which is why it's so difficult to talk about it, because we just kind of grow up in the system if you grow up here. If you don't grow up here, you don't grow up in the system. You're not racialized in the same way. That's not a negative or a positive. One thing about Andrew Yang that I want to say that I noticed watching the media once again for his strengths or weaknesses was when it was about Andrew Yang not being a New Yorker or not knowing New Yorker, I thought, I don't know if other people that are not Asian would get that same thing. The New York Times went from, Andrew Yang, you should run for mayor, to like, Andrew, you don't know New York. And I was like, wow, that's a real 180, and a really, I wasn't sure where that was, it made me feel very uncomfortable. And I felt like that was really problematic. But,
Yeah, no, just a little bit on that, and I want to turn it over to some of my other panelists. But just working on that campaign, it was eye-opening to see, because how often do you see a major Asian American candidate running for an executive position like mayor? And you know, the difference with Andrew Yang and John Liu, when John ran for mayor, is that Andrew was the front runner for most of the mayor's race. He was leading every poll until the final 6 or so weeks. And so I had this incredible morphine rush. Because my name's Trip Yang, I got to like run around with this joke for 6 months that like it's my cousin Andrew running, and like you got to vote for family. You know, I can't use that joke anymore, but you know, it was incredible. It was incredible, like to be a part of that campaign. But Chris is right in that there is this perpetual otherness, perpetual foreignness to Asian Americans. Like Andrew's a 6 foot tall guy, like broad shoulders. The guy plays basketball. He's way more athletic than like, you know, certainly more than me and more than most folks. An average New Yorker, but there was this depiction of him as a short, slanty-eyed foreigner, you know, like his favorite, you know, subway station is Times Square. It's like, well, the guy lives in Hell's Kitchen. Like, he raises his kids 2 blocks away.
That was his
So
stop.
that was his local stop. If you live in Hell's Kitchen, it's like you know, you don't need him to say something pandering and say some subway station, you know, in like South Brooklyn or Eastern Queens or something. You know, so there was a little bit of that media bias, and you know, to his credit, to the campaign's credit, they called it out. But you know, that bias was there.
Just as an aside, if anybody keeping score at home, 4 out of the 5 people up here talked about their mom. So I kind of, just so you know, you missed it earlier when you came in. But
Everyone loves mom.
just on the identity politics, I just want to, and back to the city council for 1 second. The fact that I think Dr. Louis mentioned that 5 of the city council members are Asian. So each of their districts are not necessarily Asian. I think that's really important for us to understand. And so Linda Lee, from my neck of the woods in Queens, Shekhar Krishnan, Julie Wan, Shahana Hanif, am I missing anyone? And then Sandra Ung. Sandra Ung, and I have to say, I take her out of the equation because of the district is in Flushing. But 4 out of the 5, right, are won campaigns that with diverse districts. So what and my takeaway is, you don't have to go fix anything for us to like tilt the things in our favor. Folks in our community are extremely capable people. They will, if they had a level playing field, they will go out there and do what they need to do. I'm really not focused on the people who are running for office. I'm focused, and the work that we do is focused on the community itself. And so the identity politics kind of bubbles up from there, but we're not asking for anything special. We're just asking for a level playing ground where Asian candidates can realize their personal dreams, right, of serving the community and have an equal opportunity to run. And so I approach it slightly differently. I'm glad all of those folks are there, but to me, the fact that they don't represent specific Asian communities it speaks volumes as to where our community is and where we're going.
There's certainly a political maturity that signals that's very hopeful in terms of where we're going. I mean, one of the issues is Stop Asian Hate, right? That's been the sort of big issue the last 2 or 3 years. Where have you seen that sort of move the community, and where is that going? We're in the middle of it. So we're talking about the storm in the middle of it. There was a documentary last night on PBS. How many people saw that? One Day in March. And so it's in the documentary. It's in the media. We're talking about it. Where are we going? What is it doing, to our community? How is it resetting or reformatting things?
I feel like I was chatting with a friend in the audience just now. Like we were saying, before the Asian hate crime waves, we Asians were basically invisible in this country. Nobody even mentioned us. You're happy, you're not happy, you're attacked, whatever happened to you, like nobody care. And suddenly there's the Asian attacks, and suddenly we're under the spotlight. And we were saying that, hey, let's just use this time. Whatever we get to say, let's just say it now when everybody is paying attention. Who knows how long it's gonna last? I mean, I want the Asian hate waves to be over as soon as possible. But I want this attention too. Yes.
So I've thought about that, and so this is. So what I've thought about that, I think you're absolutely right, is that there's a strange dichotomy between the invisibility and hypervisibility of Asians. And there's a hypervisibility when there's a threat or a problem. So it's not that we're invisible, but we're invisible within the civic social fabric of this community that, let's say, millions of Asians live in. So the invisibility is true. At the same time, there's hypervisibility. It's a paradox. So it makes no sense, but it is that reality. Correct. Yes. Yes. And we are right now, at this moment, we are swinging back. The international geopolitical context is China is the enemy, which means that in the next decade or two, East Asians have to be careful. But the flip side of have to be careful is we have to be engaged in the government and the space around us so that it doesn't eat us up, so that it serves us well, that we push back the negative tide, because we're in a very dangerous geopolitical environment for everyone that looks to East Asian or Chinese. Yeah.
Can I add?
Yeah.
Can I add just one thing about the visibility in the media? Yes, you're right. There were stories about Asians, but the narrative was kind of like shaped not by us. It's by the media, by the mainstream culture. And me, I write for a Chinese language newspaper, but I'm a freelancer and I have to pitch stories to the mainstream media outlets. And, as a cunning freelancer, you have to learn, like, what time the trend is where, what's the narrative, so that you... Exactly, so you pitch ideas to fit into that narrative, rather than that I found, oh, this is the story I think you guys should pay attention to. But nobody listened to me. So that's very, very, very clear trend to me.
Well, just to pick up on that, and then we'll get to your question, I promise you. So there are two things. I mean, one, I just taught a class, Asians in the US at Hunter, and I said to the class, I said, pick up a newspaper, watch the news, come graduation time, right? And you will see inevitably a story about an Asian American Pacific Islander valedictorian, right, who came here with nothing and picked up, oneself up from the bootstraps. I guarantee you, and I'm not a betting person, okay? So that's the first thing. And then the second thing I wanted to bring up was, my first book, Compelled to Excel, was actually based at Hunter and at Columbia. And one of the Hunter respondents, person's much older now, but at the time, he said to me, I really wish there was a Seinfeld with Asian American Pacific Islander characters, but the fact that they're Asian American or Pacific Islander really is not the most remarkable thing about them. Why can't they just be ordinary Americans? What's up with that? And I never forgot that, because I think that that's also a signal. It's that there are portrayals in the media, but they're incomplete, right? And when things are incomplete, it's dehumanizing. So I think there's a question in the back. Oh, yes.
Mr. Albert pointed out the difference between older Chinese, for example, and younger Chinese. It pains me so much when I go to the Museum of Chinese Americans, the only museum, and there are young activists, young Chinese activists, who say that it's the Museum of Corrupt Asians, MOCA. They say that the older Chinese don't care about the young activists. We have here the judge from the district of the court of the New York State Unified Court System. They're angry. The young Chinese are angry that instead of building homes and apartments, they're taking over the court there on near where the judge has her office and her room. They are building prison. So they don't get any support. The young Chinese, I think that we older ones, we need to support the young people, the young Filipinos, the young Chinese, the young Koreans, because we are the ones who are going to die soon, but they are the ones who will carry on what we have fought for.
Well, I actually, it seems to me that in the Chinese community, at least, the young people are quite active and they're very enthusiastic. And I was actually like trying. I'm gonna underscore what Tripp said just now, like the conversation that you mentioned between you and your parents. I think that's so important because in the Chinese community, there is the clear line that the older generation, I'm not talking about the older generation, but the new immigrants from China and their kids are not they don't agree with each other politically. So the new immigrants from China tend to be more conservative, but their kids, especially after they get into high school and get into college, they become more progressive. And this conversation between the younger generation and older generation, I think is so important because they're still the same family. We see in this country that different political views divide people and turn friends against each other. But Chinese community, this is the family ties in Chinese community is very strong. So that even if you don't agree with each other, you're still a loving family. And in this way, people talk with each other and try to learn from each other. I think it's a very effective way to help each other, to help we understand each other.
I'll just add very briefly that this type of disagreement within Asian American communities, whether it's subgroups of Asian Americans or generational divides, it's all a positive thing because at the end of the day, you're getting more conversation, more civic engagement. It's very much a positive to me. When I look at a lot of younger Asian Americans, they're very within the Democratic Party. They mostly identify as Democrats, but a lot of them are like very left wing. They voted for Bernie, for example, when he ran for president. When I look at some of the folks that I work with, who are more middle aged and a little bit older, you see a little bit of this more focus, a lot more of this focus on safety, on reducing crime. Folks are more palatable in voting for Republican candidates. Quite frankly, I see this effect with Asian Americans electorally in New York. All of this, in the long run, in the grand scheme of things, is not a bad thing. I think it's very much a positive thing. It's very important that whatever my personal beliefs are, that we don't chastise each other for their beliefs. I think Asian Americans who have a hyper focus on safety, that cannot be criticized as you're not being Democrat enough, or you're not being progressive enough. That all this is a positive, constructive thing. And so, at the end of the day, we want to build, this ecosystem where Asian Americans have more civic, governmental, political power. We're not unilateral, and that's a good thing in that.
So, yeah, your quadrant, right? The diagonal.
You had a question there, then Susan, and then Doris?
Oh, and then,
And then in the back.
yes.
So why don't you go first, because I think we can
Oh, yeah, I have a question. So my question is related to I guess to the tensions within the Asian community. I think we've talked a lot about building unity with other racial groups and ethnic groups. But my question is kind of related to what about within the community? One thing that kind of struck me a lot in this conversation is about anti-Asian hate,
That's excellent. Yeah.
So this question goes to Mr. Albert. You know, you talk about education and the funding. The city spends 32% of the city's budget on education. However, as you said before, we are all appalled by how our education system is lacking. Now, the current chancellor, he started Eagle Academy, which is a charter school. What do you think are remedies to help with our education system? Perhaps increasing the charter mandate in terms of number of charter schools, or holding the teachers union accountable, because I feel like a lot of times they are not really advocating in the best interests of the students, but instead for the teachers themselves.
So I'm going to actually ask a question of Tripp. So Tripp mentioned that perhaps there should be a political movement to increase the number of city council seats. And that's not unprecedented. We have done that before. It went to 51, and it was a while back. It was before I became a judge, so like several decades ago. So there is, and something that I don't think was commented on is that we will soon have non-citizen voting. And so that is going to impact, I think, the political landscape in a positive way for Asian Americans. And so perhaps you can comment on that after you take all the questions.
One last question.
Yeah, over
When I
there.
Come to the end of, sorry, go ahead. Oh, I'll come back to you.
Just two things. Regarding the education system, it would be better if the powers that be were more concerned about the students and more unconcerned about themselves. Okay, when Richard Farina was the chancellor, I told him, you need to teach the students, you need to tell the students what's the difference between Mozilla Firefox, Google Chrome, Microsoft Edge, and PDF, while you're still serving Ask the Chancellor under Frankenstein. Because I'm familiar with all four browsers, I've used all four. And as far as someone said Asians are alone, no, they're not alone like Michael Jackson. Okay, if you travel to the Flushing Library, you'll see many Asians. That's an Asian community. That's downtown Flushing as far as I consider. So the Asians aren't alone like Michael Jackson. They're still around. They're not leaving anytime soon. They're staying alive like the Bee Gees.
I'm going to, last question from Professor, oh, did Glenn leave? Glenn, are you still here? Okay.
I think he has to teach.
Yeah, okay. Oh, he had to teach. Sorry. Okay. I'll let the panel answer the questions that have been posed. Yeah.
You know, about the education, you know, there are lots of suggestions out there, and I am not an expert in education, right? So I can't comment to what will increase opportunity. What my comments were getting at was really, instead of pitting one minority group against another with equal needs, right? How about looking at the system and trying to figure out those small things that we can do, right? And so understanding that, I think it's incredibly important to understand that particularly Chinese American students come from households that require free and reduced paid lunch. And those schools that are in those neighborhoods need assistance as well. And so all I was trying to say was that there's probably more commonality in terms of need, and that this issue was a wedge issue that was unnecessary. And I think there are other people who are far more expert in, you know, the pedagogical aspects and structural aspects of DOE that can answer your question.
Well, hold on, let them finish answering and then, okay. Yeah, sorry.
I'll just, there's a lot of good perspectives being shared, so I'll just address, you know, Judge Doris Lincoln's question. I think it will be, in general, a positive if, especially with non-citizen voting on the municipal level, you know, hopefully we'll have non-citizen voting, you know, at the state level, maybe at the federal level one day, that at the very least at the municipal level, communities have more incentive and it's easier to vote for them so that their interests are better represented. You know, currently in the city of New York, the Latino population is close to 30%. The black population is well over 20%. The API population is close to 18%. Every community wants representation, and every community is entitled to ask for and demand for more representation. I really do think you got to have more, city council seats. You got to have representation that's reflective of the city's diversity, but also currently in the city budget, I believe it's less than 2% of the city budget goes towards Asian American communities and organizations and programs, and it's got to be a little bit more reflective. And so I hope that the electoral trend moving forward is that, yes, you have more Asian Americans talking about these issues, but because the community as a whole is empowered to vote more and to have less barriers of entry to civic participation, you will have the community's interests represented more. And that could include sometimes, by the way, you can have very good black leadership that's representing Asian American needs, or a white elected official, or a Latino elected official. These things aren't mutually exclusive. I think as a whole, if the community is empowered through more of these civic tools, it's a good thing in the long run.
One more question. There's the perception that candidates only pop up when it's time for election. I'm talking about Jennifer Rajkumar. She lost in the financial district again, the district of Judge Pinkowan here, because of all the white bankers there. They didn't vote for her. So she went to Hollis, Queens, where there are a lot of Asians, and of course she won, and she's now a politician. And then I'm talking, of course, about a lot of these Asians like Suraj Patel, who ran against Caroline Maloney and Jeff Nadler. He only comes up when it's time for election. He's
Okay.
quite good.
Thank-
He's good. He's dynamic, but he should be more. There.
So
Community.
we appreciate your thoughts.
Let's chat
I
after.
think,
We'll
yeah,
be here.
We have one more,
Yeah.
and then or one more
Sorry,
comment. or-
just
yeah.
on that last point, in addition to non-citizen voting, I think ranked choice voting was actually the key, difference in those 4 races that I talked about. And I want to talk about that Pan-Asian question that you brought up. This is going to be a challenge for us, right? We've been talking about how we're on the precipice of great things and how our community is needed and necessary in the voice of democracy and participatory government. But there are also challenges, right? So how do we work as a community, right? So one of the first things that I had to do in my own community is to explain to people that there is something called a South Asian identity. And it's not something maybe you bring home with you every day, but that's your political identity. And so however you've split up your own, yourself into your religion, your ethnicity, your language, in the ballot box, we're all Asian, right? And so we began with a exercise with the census. I don't mean to be long-winded here. I know we're at the end, but this is important. It's that there were people within the South Asian community who were explicitly choosing not to say Asian or Indian, and they were writing in, right? Writing in what ethnicity that they believed that best represented them. This was a colossal mistake because there was no way to aggregate this data, and it was actually basically spit out by the census. And so when we are presented with an opportunity to show unity within the community, whether it's something as simple as filling out a survey, right? If there is no box for Indian American, I always pick Asian. And it's because it's important to be counted. And I think these are small things that we can do to show our size and our power. And I hope that, as all of you are probably activists in some ways, you can work with your communities to talk about how to demonstrate this kind of unity.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a political identity. It's a created one, and we won't take any more questions, but we'll chat with you afterwards. But I'll say that as COVID-19 shutdown was coming and there was anti-Asian hate concerns bubbling, the first calls I had were from my South Asian friends and lawyers who said, we've been through this. What can we do to help? And I remember stopping and thinking, oh, I haven't been a good ally. I haven't, during post 9/11 when Indians were, you're a Muslim because you're a Sikh, right? It's all the same. Like the East Asians part of the Asian Americans were not very active. Not everybody, but as a whole. And that's something, a realization I had selfishly to come realize only when it was anti-East Asian visually, right? It's a process I had to learn and to be grateful and then to commit to working together. It's just an everyday, everything sort of battle. It's not pretty, it's not easy, it's just every day in the trenches. Vivian?
Yeah, I just wanted to say it was one of the exceptions were Japanese Americans in response to 9/11 and the Islamophobia that occurred and the scapegoating of Muslim South Asian Americans. Yeah, no, but the Japanese Americans specifically, because based on their experiences with the incarceration during World War II. Yes, but I think this has been an amazing conversation, as manifest by the fact that it's hard to close. But there's a coffee and tea break, I believe, and then we will come back at 4:30. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, those of you here and everyone on Zoom. For those of you I haven't had a chance to say hello to, I'm Jennifer Rabin, have the incredible privilege of serving as the president of Hunter College, where the American dream still comes true. It is a great pleasure to join you at this important conference and to introduce a shining example of the American dream and how Hunter College has helped support that dream. Our wonderful City Council member, Sandra Ong. So let's give it up. All of us at Hunter College are proud to host this event here in our renowned Public Policy Center, Roosevelt House. This conference has a special meaning to us because the Asian American community faces multiple challenges going forward, and we at Hunter are determined to be leaders in developing strong, responsive public policies. We feel this so deeply because more than 1/3 of our undergraduate students are Asian American. Our Asian American Studies program, which is now nearly 3 decades old, and we are so proud, is the largest, and we'd like to say strongest in the CUNY system, serving more than 1,000 students each year with more than 20 course offerings. And Councilwoman Ong, I want to tell you, I know many of our faculty know, we're just launching a search now for a named professorship named after Helen Zia, extraordinary Asian American activist. And her role will be to support our extraordinary director, Dr. Louie. So that is incredibly exciting. In these classes, as I said, over 1,000 students with more than 20 course offerings, and at conferences like these that we organize, that we really work on being responsive and supporting the advocacy in this city. So I want to give a shout out to Basil Smikle, our Roosevelt House Public Policy Director, who helped organize today's event. And really, even more than a shout out, a real hooray for Dr. Vivian Louie, who is the director of Hunter's Asian American Studies Centers. Vivian is a gem. She is an activist, she is a scholar, she is a leader, and we're so proud of where she's taking us at the forefront at Hunter College. Also, shout out to Chris Kwok, who we've heard from today, one of our great outstanding teachers in the Asian American Studies program, and one of the great voices denouncing violence against Asians. So thank you, Chris. All of you know today, one of the purposes of this conference is to explore the paths forward for the Asian American community. And yet, I think most of us can't be sure where their paths will lead. We can really identify with certainty the potential leaders. And everyone here knows that City Council member Sandra Ong is top among them. Sandra's story is like countless of thousands in New York's immigrant community and like so many from Hunter College. She and her family sought safety in the United States, in their case, fleeing the genocide taking place in Cambodia. She arrived in New York when she was only 7 years old. She flourished in high school and then, I'm so proud to say, made a very smart decision on where to go to college. 1996 graduate of Hunter College, and then went on to the very prestigious Columbia Law School. She could have done many things with that law degree, but Sandra chose a life of service. She became a lawyer for a nonprofit that works with survivors of domestic violence. She dedicated herself to helping seniors in her community gain access to services and resources. She focused on troubled small businesses, worked on school issues during the COVID lockdown, and pushed for increased public safety. She added government service to her record, most recently in the office of Congresswoman Grace Meng, where she assisted constituents with immigration, veteran affairs, and Social Security issues. The history of helping people in need is a major reason why Queens voters chose her as one of the 5 Asian Americans elected to the City Council last year. What an incredible number. I think that deserves a record round of applause. And true to her values, she has concentrated at City Hall on issues that may not make headlines, but matter deeply to her and her community. Issues like expanding language access so that residents with limited English can get services and be active in civic life. The bills Councilwoman Ung's helped pass have increased access to interpreters for callers to 311 and will enhance language access for small business owners. One way to trace the political history of New York City is through the identity of its mayors. At first, they were exclusively Dutch or English. Then, as the makeup of the city changed, the previous outsiders became the insiders, the Irish, the Jews, the Italians, the African Americans. So, at this conference, I think we would all agree that it is no stretch at all to think that before too long, an Asian American will join that honor roll. And maybe perhaps an Asian American woman, since their record in elective politics shows that they do very well. And we think we all agree we're past due for a woman mayor. So we're not making any predictions here at Hunter College, but let's all keep an eye on one of our own. So whatever you do, Councilwoman, whether it's top office or just continuing to be a great leader and an incredible constituent service person, I want you to keep Hunter strong in your heart. So please join me to receive your new winter gear, your Hunter Center.
Thank you, President Rob, for that warm introduction. Since becoming president in 2001, you have made Hunter College not only the crown jewel of the CUNY system, but one of the top universities in the nation. And thank you for your support of Asian American Studies here in Hunter College. I would be remiss right now if I don't shout out some close friends that I have in this audience. I want to give a big shout out to Professors Glenn McPanty, Chris Kroc, Mitch Wu, all I've known for such a long time in the community. And truthfully, only recently found out you guys in different ways are like professors here in this college. So we have an affinity for Hunter College, and thank you for all your work in the community. And I want to also thank Roosevelt House Public Policy Institute and the Asian American Studies Center for organizing and hosting this event and inviting me to speak with all of you. As a proud alum and member of Hunter College, class of 1996, we were going through in the office today, how long has it been since I graduated? in my mind, it's really only a few years ago, but as we counted, it's like 20 plus years. I really do remember my time here very fondly. And one aspect of what I appreciate here was the diversity of student body, not just ethnically or racially, but it was also a mix of the younger students with the older students that already had experience in the workplace. And I remember just having conversations with them in the classroom, thinking that they really at that time gave me a perspective that I didn't have before. And also thinking one day I will too take classes again at Hunter College. And I still have those dreams. And if for anyone who ever wonders, I did not come to Hunter College thinking I'll be an elected office. I did not even major in political science. I majored in sociology and in religion. And it's really one of the most wonderful academic experience I ever had throughout my life in academia. So thank you. I want to thank you to the Hunter College for providing me with that. So a little bit, 20 years after graduating, I am now the New York City Council member, and I represent District 20, which includes, I think everyone knows Flushing, Queens. It also includes Mitchell Linden, Murray Hill, and Queensboro Hill. And this district is unique to New York City. It is one of the 51 districts that's the only majority Asian districts. And according to the 2020 census, 72% of people who live in District 20 identify as Asian, and it is my honor to be the first Asian American woman to represent the district. And according to a recent report by the Asian American Federation, between 2013 and 2020, the number of voting age Asian Americans across New York City grew by 19.5%. That outpaces all other racial groups. And they're young. Over 40% of them are under the age of 40, which I believe is key to understanding the rise of Asian American in civic participation. Many of these young people are children of immigrant parents who either came to this country at a young age, were born here, and spent their formative years in this country. And many are here in the room with us, and this is also my story. As President Rob said, I came to this country when I was 7. We fled the genocide in Cambodia. And like many families who escaped the atrocities perpetrated by the government, not all my family made it out. My mother never heard from her 2 sisters again, or her parents, which are my grandparents. And I say that because I think this is a time, right now in New York City, we do have, migrants coming here. I think sometimes people always wonder, why do people come here? And I always say, if people can stay in their country, if people stay in the country where they grew up, where they know the culture and the language, of course that's what they would want to do. Frankly, that's what my mom, my family wanted to do. But we had no choice, to do that. So I always, talking about my history, I always wish people here in New York City always keeps that in perspective when we talk about immigration. So we made it to Flushing, Queens, and we began to rebuild our lives. And I went to all the New York City public schools. And my mother worked 12 hours a day, 6 days a week in a laundromat in Manhattan. So she was probably home 8 hours a day, max. And again, my parents were busy adjusting a new way of life, surviving financially, and providing a better quality of life for their children. So, thinking about time to be politically active probably isn't on my parents' minds, and probably not on many immigrants' minds right now, so that's what they're trying to do. But their hard work and perseverance gave people like me, children of hardworking immigrants, the opportunity to be civically engaged. Being elected to public office really was not the goal my parents had for me. They wanted me to pursue a stable job, to get a reliable paycheck. But like the rest of the AAPI community, they're beginning to understand the importance of being civically engaged. These new Asian American voices in civic political life and the new generation of Asian American leaders that I see in front of this room understand our communities will be overlooked if we're not involved and have a seat at the table where decisions are being made. And I believe this is why we are seeing this growth in the Asian influence on local politics at this moment in time. The trailblazers like Congresswoman Grace Meng and Senator John Liu, our community is seeing more and more the importance of political engagement and the possibility of electing Asian Americans to office. We are recognizing the importance not waiting for a seat at the table, but demanding that seat. We are also seeing our civic community expanding, increasing number of advocacy groups and skilled organizers working to engage our community and ensure our voices are part of the discussion. These groups are able to connect and engage with new American citizens. They speak their language, understand their culture. They help elect people who look like us, who has lived the Asian American experience to office. And I could tell you my experience growing up as a daughter of 2 Asian parents with limited English proficiency has radically shaped my priorities as a city council member. As I grew up, my parents struggled with the language. As a child, it fell on me and my brother to interpret for them as a community of doctors or, everyday situations. And that hasn't ended since I entered adulthood, and the pandemic highlighted the struggle for my family and many families like mine. From finding a vaccine for my parents to scheduling doctor's appointments, my parents relied on me to navigate the system because of language barriers. And unfortunately, my father recently passed away for a degenerative disease, and I once again learned how obstacle like language has proven to be for immigrant families. Everything from Medicare to finding caregivers to navigating the paperwork of their loved one passed, it's hard and it's difficult. And I'll say this honestly, as someone who is, I'm a lawyer. I have worked 20 plus years in government, and it's still very hard for me right now, to really handle all this. And it's really hard to find groups, culturally competent, linguistically diverse support systems. So, and also my district, I don't know, and a lot of you know, over 90% of Asian seniors in my district have limited English proficiency and are dealing with situations like this on a daily basis. And I often think about those seniors, those people who do not actually have family members who could help them. And that's actually something that actually, like my office is open. My office is open, to the public, Mondays to Fridays. I'm also announcing this too if anybody has any questions in the district. It's open Mondays to Fridays, 10 to 6. And we don't have hybrid because one of the things I said clear when, we was elected, I was like, this isn't a district that works well, dealing on the Zooms or calling the office or using like an email system, which I'm thinking now, if I ever tell that to my mom, she's gonna look at me like, what am I talking about? So it is important. I'm actually very proud that, our office is open to the public for people to receive those, the assistance that they need. And that's why I made expanding language access as my top priority in the City Council. Just last month, the City Council passed 2 of my bills that will improve the experience for callers to 311 who need translation services by creating protocols for identifying the language of the 311 caller, ensuring they're connected to a translator in a timely fashion. Other bills I'm to introduce, including legislation to require the city, when necessary, to provide translation services in languages that aren't included in their language access law, and other to enhance language access for small business owners, many of whom are immigrants. Expanding language access to local government goes hand in hand with aspiring civic participation in our immigrant communities. By expanding this access to government in the community, they do understand the connection between government and their own daily lives, instead of thinking a government is foreign, it's punitive and regulatory. And this is something that is so important to me since being elected, is to help everyday people connect to government so they understand government is here for you. You're paying taxes to government, so government should be here for you. Government should not be an obstacle to what you need. So I don't believe the rise in civic participation in the Asian American community is a statistical blip. I believe we'll continue to see more and more Asian Americans getting elected and running for office. So this year, as said, we actually have the most API members in the history of the legislative body, which is great. So I'm gonna give a big clap for that too. And moreover, I'm starting to see more Asian Americans working in government and political offices. When I first started working in government as the chief of staff for Assemblymember Mang, there was only a handful of us working in different government offices. And now you could see us, across the city, state, and federal government, which I think is actually very important. And currently, while my district is the only Asian majority district in the city, that too could change one day. Asian Americans are the fastest growing racial group in New York City, and I predict that the growing influence will continue and be reflected at all levels of government and in the polls. And in conclusion, with all the students here at Hunter College, I know you will be leaders in shaping that. As you continue studies at Hunter College and prepare to pursue careers in academia, government, law, and business, or wherever life takes you, remember the Hunter College motto. I'm going to say this in English. I don't know Latin. The care of the future is mine. It is you, the next generation, that will continue to battle for equality and representation at all levels of government. And while AAPI community has made historic inroads into all levels of public and private life, from CEOs to Congress members, We still have to build upon the shoulders of those who came before us. And after all, you never know, the President of the United States could be like out there in the audience right now. Thank you again. And now I think I'm taking a hot seat, right? Okay, I'm ready.
Question.
Sure.
Sandra, you said that your office, my name is Cecilia Gulas, and I'm a graduate of nursing school, BMCC, the best kept secret in New York City because it's the best nursing school. Okay, Sandra, you said that your office does away with email and all that stuff because you prefer that they come to you in person.
Sorry, I misspoke on that. We definitely have not done away with emails,
Okay,
phone
but-
calls, and all that. What I included is making sure that office doors are open
Okay,
so
okay,
people
good.
could physically walk in.
Thank you. Now, try saying that to the New York City Housing Preservation and Development, HPD. When you go there, they will say, send it by, so you have a letter, send it by email, send it by mail. They don't even want you to come inside that building on 100 Gold Street. They're so exclusive. You have to pass like 100 security guards just to go to the lobby and register. They are a big bureaucratic machine that does nothing. I think that with the crisis of homelessness in New York City, I think that they should merge their Office of Emergency Management with the Office of the Homeless Services, DHS. I think DHS is better equipped to handle the unhoused New Yorkers that HPD handles. When there's a fire or there's an illegal basement issue, Red Cross refers them to HPD. You know what? There was. Okay, my question is, would you think it's a good idea that the housing crisis should be dealt more by the Department of Homeless Services than by HPD? Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for speaking to me about this issue. So to make it very, very clear, I do agree with you that city agencies should open their doors to everybody, especially if it's a front-facing agency that deals with daily lives. They should be open to people to walk in with the paperwork and not just by email or by telephone call. So I definitely agree with you over that. The homeless crisis is an issue in our city that really requires a lot of work, frankly, by many different agencies, and certainly not just one. So in that way, I do believe we do have to work together with all the agencies to tackle this problem and issue. So thank you for your comments.
Just two things, Sandra. Regarding the HPD, regarding 100 Gold Street and 932 Arthur Avenue, if you don't already know at both locations, it's bad enough you have to pass a security check. It's worse you have to remove your belt and sag. I feel the second rule needs to be abolished immediately. I don't know why we have to remove our belts. Okay, and regarding the libraries that line your district, Queensboro Hill, Flushing, I feel the computers should have 4 browsers. They have Mozilla Firefox and Microsoft Edge, but they should have Google Chrome and Opera, particularly Opera. Do you think it's possible you can make that happen while you're in office? It'd be gladly appreciated.
Thank you. Just a little about HPD. If anybody has issues with reaching out to HPD or getting a response from HPD, anyone from the district is welcome to reach out to our office. And I know our office will definitely be, working to reach out to HPD to make sure you get the answers you want. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi there. Thank you so much for speaking. My name is Jackie Mariano. I'm a faculty here at the Asian American Studies program. Hope we can be friends too. All your friends are here. I guess something that I'm really interested in your work is the disaggregation of Asian American communities and the very diverse interests and issues that they bring up, and even conflicts within the Asian American community on certain issues. I'm from Elmhurst, and with our city council redistricting, we're having a lot of issues about where the Asian American community stands with regards to housing. I know that's a theme in our question so far, but I guess I would love to know what the makeup is of the Asian American community in your district, disaggregated, and are there issues that the community is very united on, and issues that there are many conflicts in, and how do you deal with that conflict? Mm-hmm.
Sure. So I would say Asian Americans were not a monolith, and I think a lot of people say that, and I generally that's very true. In my community, we have mostly it's Chinese, then Koreans, then we do have South Asians. That makes up to 73% of when I say Asians. The other parts of it, it's also Latino Americans, African American, and white. So that's the other, I'm sorry, what is it, 27%. I think some issues that the Asian American community that, we do agree on, I would just say small business. That's one issue which I feel like if you're immigrant especially, and a lot of immigrants in the district, and I believe also in Elmhurst, are small business owners, the issues that they face is something that, I believe, that is cross over to all Asian Americans, like the issue back to language access. That's also an issue that all the small business owners face, and moreover, I have introduced a bill with the small business. I mean, right now they're only required to provide translations in the top 10 languages, and my bill actually says that you need to provide more than the top 10 languages, because I think we do now understand there's actually a lot of diversity in New York City and a lot of languages that are spoken. Conflicts. Oh, okay. I guess you know what? I'll be. If you're here around for, I think most of the time, I feel like as an elected official, I try to find commonalities where there are commonalities, and to work together toward that, even though we might disagree on certain aspects of that issue. But I think it's important to work on commonalities so we could get together toward the end goal.
Yes, thank you so much, Council Member, for being here. My name is Alexis, and I work here at the Roosevelt House in the Public Policy Program. I love what you're doing around language access. I know that some of the other Asian Americans in the council are also working on language access, like Councilwoman Shahana Hanif. So I was wondering what other languages you're hoping to provide services in beyond the required ones, as well as beyond 311, what other services that you're hoping to expand all these languages into. Thank you.
Sure. So one of the issues in New York City, with the different city agencies that I have noticed is that we have an over-reliance on language line. We like to say we're the city that speaks all different languages, but what we really mean is that we're the city that uses language line. And that itself is not enough to say we really provide language access. I always felt language line should be at the last resort. It should not be the first resource we use as in New York City, especially when we are in a city where I feel like we really have a very diverse population that is very bilingual, sometimes even trilingual. So I don't necessarily understand why is the gap about hiring more speakers that could speak different languages back to the front-facing, agencies. I mean, I do understand that every agency can do this, but when we're talking about HRA, for example, HRA does a lot of front-facing work for people who are applying for housing or people who are applying for Medicaid, for SNAP benefits. And when, that agency always constantly needs to use a language line, I find that to be actually very puzzling because it's a very big agency that should be able to hire, speakers in different languages. And back to 311, when I had a hearing, I actually did quiz them pretty hard on this issue. While they said they had bilingual speakers in 311 who were able to speak Spanish, that's all they had. They did not have any other speakers in different languages, which then defaults to using 311, use the language line, which is anyone who ever speaks a different language other than English that you call 311. Actually, being English speaker calling 311 is already not a very pleasant process begin off anyway. But if you speak a different language, you actually are going through a couple loops before you could even get to the language you're supposed, you want to reach. And there's no guaranteed that that is actually the right language being identified, but sometimes it's misidentified. So also, back to the issue of the actual translation, language line is just like a straight interpretation service. It doesn't really interpret issues, and the way you interpret something could actually affect how someone's listening to it and responding to it. And that's where the cultural component really comes in. And that's why I think it's important to have people who are bilingual or trilingual working for city agencies who understand if someone's calling them with that language. That's really, it's not just the literal translation of what they want, but what is it that, what is it they're trying to convey to you as a city agency, and what are you trying to convey back?
Hi, my name is Mitch, and thank you so much again for your opening remarks as you highlighted some of the barriers, nuances, and challenges of the immigrant community and what it means, right? And many times in our city, the most vulnerable, the ones that need the most, the voices that matter the most are the ones that's least heard, right? And so just want to share your insights, and if you have any guidance or recommendations to the Hunter community, especially undergrads, what they could do to become civically engaged. Have any pointers for that? Many times they just think, oh, you have to major political science and then run for office or something like that, but we could always be, so you could share that. And then also subsequently, what your office is doing to also increase that, right? Especially for a district that's predominantly Asian, immigrant, and working class.
Sure. So I have a lot, and I really meant it in this speech when I say, the work we're doing now is really for the next generation, and hopefully to inspire the next generation to get more involved. And by involved, I take voting. Voting is important. Even, registering to vote is good. Voting is even better. And moreover, I think a lot of people think the only way to get involved is to run for office. And let me tell you, there's many ways to get involved. And some of the ideas I have is right now, we have a lot of campaigns going on. Just bipartisan conversation, but there's a lot of campaigns going on both sides. There's actually a governor's race going on. There's some congressional races going on. The state assembly, state senate races. There are some competitive races going on. So it's important if you want to even volunteer and see if that is actually something you want to do. Campaigning is, I'll be honest, not fun. But it's important if one day you are thinking about running for office. I think it's very important to do this at a young age to see what this is about before, engaging on that next level. Moreover, I think a lot, I don't know, I've been saying this a lot. You have a lot of civic organizations in your neighborhoods. You have tenant organizations in your neighborhoods. You definitely have a community board in your neighborhood. And that's actually, I find, the best way what you can do to get involved, to actually know what's going on in your local neighborhoods. Sometimes it's very hard to know what's going on in your local neighborhoods if you don't get involved in that level. Because a lot of things going in your local neighborhood is not making the Daily News or the New York Post. And sometimes maybe your neighborhood might not have a local paper. So it's so important to just already know what's going in your neighborhood. And also, I think through those organizations and getting involved, you would. It's also important to learn how to advocate, and how to advocate effectively for what is it you want for your community, for your neighborhood, and even for yourself. Oh, Glenn.
Hi.
Hi, Glenn.
I am so proud. You know, Councilwoman, thank you so much. I am so proud of all the work that you've done and how far you've come. And, you know, to be an alumnus of this school, you know, you're a tremendous role model. So I actually want to take you up on your question about what, now that you've crossed over to the other side, what is it? I actually wanted, if you could share, like, what is your biggest surprise now that you are an elected official sitting member of the council? Or what would you like to have known before you crossed over? I mean, not necessarily dish, or maybe what would you have told yourself when you decided to do this?
Wow. So Glenn, thank you. Thank you. So I don't know if a lot of people know. I know Glenn since, oh my gosh, 2005. I bet when I first met Glenn, he didn't think I was going to run for office. And actually, Glenn and I were involved in the Asian American Bar Association. We were co-chairs, I think, of the pro bono committee. So, I mean, it's always great to see, you know, you out here, you, Mitch, I don't know, have the Chris out here, which I was also in the Asian American Bar Association with Chris advocating for our community and the Bar Association. You know, I have to say, when people ask me this question about what I wish I knew, I have to say I was very prepared for this moment, and I thought very long and hard about this. This is, after all, a life to public service. You are, you know, you are helping the community. You are serving the public. So this is a job that is all-encompassing. It will be your entire life. And if it's something you want to do, I think it's amazing. It's been 10 months, and it's really been already one of the most gratifying experiences in my life. I mean, I'm going to be honest, sure, there are high moments, there are low moments. But I do, okay, one thing I'm lucky that I had this. I actually have people around me who was, I had a great campaign staff, volunteers, who actually had experience running helping other candidates run for different offices, who really knew the community. So that was very helpful. And, you know, I also had, you know, a really dedicated campaign staff too. And that's also very important. I mean, you're not, you know, anybody who wants to run for office, you're not out here by yourself. You know, you do have a whole team with you. And also, you know, when you do run, I feel like people who believe in you, you'll be amazed. You'll be amazed at the people who do believe you that will come out. You haven't talked to them for 5 years, and they find you, and they connect with you, and they said, you know, I want to help you. How could I help you? And I think those are amazing. And after being elected, I mean, one thing I learned, I'm thankful for, because I have two of my staff members here, Shane and Alexander over there. I really have a wonderful office. Again, it really does take a whole team effort to run a good office.
Hi, I'm Larry Lee. I'm the board president of the Coalition for Asian American Children and Families. As you know, the coalition advocates for children and families, but part of our advocacy is trying to help all the agencies that provide services to Asian Americans. And to do that, we need money. The council, I think the last time I looked, they give about 2% of what they give out to those agencies that provide services to Asian Americans. Do you have any recommendations for how to increase that percentage so that we can get a fair share?
You know, okay, I could say this flat out, that is wrong. Obviously, Asian Americans make up more than that in, you know, in New York City, and we should not be getting 2%. But I'll say one thing, the fact that we have more Asian American elected officials in the city council is helpful. And also, I would say this, I represent a majority Asian district, as I said. So people come to me, which is great, which is fine. But I think it's very important also to hold the non-Asian American elected officials that has a significant Asian American population accountable for this too. So for example, you might be out, I'm just going to throw out, I don't know, somewhere in Brooklyn, right? You should be, I know Sunset Park, that's a big area, but there's many other areas in Brooklyn that actually has a good amount of Asian American population. We need to hold those elected officials accountable for also funding the not-for-profits that they know very well is serving their district.
So, council member, we're very proud of your work. I was wondering what sort of advice you would offer to women candidates or women considering public office. Personally, I believe that women are scrutinized a little bit more, and if you're an Asian woman candidate, you're scrutinized even more. I'd like your insight and advice to those people.
Thank you, Judge Doris. And I have to say, Judge Doris Lynn Cohen is one of my mentors. I also know her since 2005. And she really has been an inspiration for me throughout my path, even before running for office and definitely when running for office. It is still not easy being a woman running for office, especially an Asian American woman running for office. I would say when I was running for office, the comment will be, well, she's nice. She's a nice girl. that is the comment, right? I had a lot of men running, frankly, with less experience than I did in government. But I don't think they thought that hard about running for office. They just said, I'm running for office without, I'll be honest, without thinking about the resume and what it needs, what it takes to be elected official. Well, I felt like I really, really worked hard, and I thought through this process a lot. But again, it comes down to, well, you're a nice girl. And I think the other issue is, would she have the leadership abilities? I think one of, as a woman, Asian American woman, it always comes down to, would she know how to advocate? Would she have the leadership abilities? And would she be tough enough to handle this position? And I would say to all the women candidates that are, thinking about running for office or being a leadership capability, like a leadership role, I say just to continue to do what you're doing. Don't let the doubters around you question what you've been doing, because obviously what you're doing has been right so far to get to where you are. And don't let other people question your leadership ability, how tough you are you gonna make it once you get there?
Hi, Councilman. I was just wondering, as an Asian woman, do you feel pressure to be nice? Like everybody says she's nice. Because there is a stereotype that if you challenge people, she's a bitch or she's a dragon. Sorry, didn't mean to say that. That's a B word. Or the dragon lady. And there is a very, very strong stereotype of that.
Absolutely. I'm gonna be I'm gonna be very upfront about that stereotype. It's in our Asian American community, it's easier to accept a woman when she is nice, right? When she fits this image of how they think a woman, especially Asian American woman, should be. The way she speaks, the way she approaches the situation. Is she that, she aggressive? Like you said, she's too aggressive, then, she's just being, like you said, the B word, right? If she's being too aggressive, the B word. But you know what? If she's not being aggressive enough, then you're being questioned whether or not you have that leadership skill, and can you advocate for your, community or your issue effectively. So that's always, like you said, like both sides of that. And Yes, it's a catch-22, which, but this is something, again, after running for office, I just made a realization. I'm going to be who I am. I'm going to be who I am to make who I am to be who I am today. I will continue to be to be on that path.
Do you have any closing reflections, or you don't have to?
No, I want to thank all of you for inviting me here to speak today. Again, it's been 10 months in, but it really, really is for me, going to Hunter College really was one of the most, I'd say, experience in my life. I should have said in my speech that was actually somewhat life-changing, from the professors that really took care to talk with the students, and I learned so much from attending a college like Hunter College. So I'm really honored to be here today, to be back at home, and I promise President Rob this will not be my last time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Hi there, thank you very much I hope you enjoy this amazing documentary, which will be screened soon on PBS. The final segment of this wonderful afternoon conference is a talk back via Zoom with Ron Wong, who is here with us. Hey Ron, can you hear me? You're muted.
Yeah, I can hear you. Thanks.
All right, Ron. So
Awesome.
nice to meet you. Yeah. Thank you very much for executive producing this amazing documentary for us and joining us today. I'm here with Chris Kwok, and you probably can't see Chris just now, but he's here, I assure you, and just a wonderful in-person and Zoom audience. I thought we could just start by your sharing some reflections about why you worked with your amazing team to make this documentary.
Yeah, well, thank you, and I appreciate you all and Chris for helping put this together and the important message that we're trying to get out there. I think this has been a long process, to be frank. It started out as something very different. In California, we had a chance to elect John Chung for governor. I don't know if you remember, that was in 2018, 4 years ago. So I thought it would be good. John and I had been friends, and there was a few seminal moments in politics for AAPIs, and Michael Wu's race for mayor in Los Angeles in the 90s, and then John Chung for governor was another one. And when he drew Gavin Newsom, who is the current governor of California, I don't know if you've seen Gavin Newsom, but he looks better than a movie star. And when you see him in person, he's 6'4", he's better looking, he's taller than. So he comes out of central casting, and so I want to create a story that looked at the implicit biases that we have, especially as we try to step up into the executive branch, to the highest levels, governors, mayors, and whatnot. And explore what kind of challenges we have as APIs, not coming out of central casting, not fitting the norm. And that's why you see a lot of even the discussion, the quotes from the elected officials in the current movie talking about that or alluding to that point, right? So it began as that story, but then when the former president started throwing gasoline on race relations and the pandemic happened, a lot of folks, and I'm sure most everyone who's been involved knows, okay, we're next. We're going to be stereotyped. We're going to be victimized. So we pivoted the movie into what you saw today. But another point I think we were trying to make was, all of us who've been involved and had to go against the notion that APAs are not ready. And that means ready at all levels, ready to be consultants, ready to be activists, ready to make a difference. I wanted to highlight that we are ready, right? That we have people at all levels of government who are ready to step up, be the governor, be the mayor, be the president one day. And that's really the message of the story. The show, we're ready, but that's going to take work, and we're going to have to fight for it. And the current environment of hate is nothing new. It's nothing new. And this is a history of racism. And hopefully people that are getting active because of, it's so blatant, can get political, because it's more than just marching on the streets and being active through social media. It's really, getting boots on the ground and walking precincts and doing all the work that's happening. And I know it's happening in New York as well.
Thank you so much. So I just wanted to bring in 2 points, if I may. So one was, I don't know if you were able to join us earlier, and it's fine if you were not. But we had a fantastic panel that Chris Kwok organized for us, and then he graciously invited me to co-moderate with him. And Trip Yang was one of the speakers, and he basically said, he's a political consultant who had worked with Andrew Yang's campaign, amongst others. And he said, Andrew Yang is like 6 feet tall and a former athlete. And yet, if you look at the mass media coverage of him, it's as if he is not those things, right? So I'm just kind of reinforcing your point about the implicit bias that's part of the air that we breathe. And we might not even be aware that we're breathing that air, but that it's there. And then the other thing I wanted to share is the question of, I think it needs to be put on the table, is America ready, right? And how can we make America ready? Because, there were some Asian American Studies faculty here earlier, a bunch of us, in addition to Chris, of course. And, we all teach these wonderful courses here at Hunter College. And one of the things that we teach as well is how there has been really robust Asian American Pacific Islander activism, right, for so many years. But we're not aware of it in America. And even, we should not assume that Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders themselves are aware of that history, right? Of, where we get birthright citizenship from, where we get mandated supports in our public schools for English language learners. All of this is from the activism in the courts, right? Primarily because Asian Americans were denied the right to become naturalized citizens in our own country for so long. So if you could just maybe speak to that a little bit, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point. And are we ready? I mean, a lot of people didn't think the country was ready for Barack Obama, right? And it happened, and it happened pretty quickly. But I wish I was more optimistic. I think we're going to have to take it. We have to be ready for it because, number one, we deserve to be there and treated that is part of anyone's American dream, is that we should be able to lead this country, right? And so I think that's another point I'd like, is that we have to take this power. And that happens by activism. It happens by messaging. It happens by breaking stereotypes and learning our own history. I think it's a great point. All the change we've had is in response to crisis, whatever that crisis was. And I have to remind people that, and people don't know our own history within our own communities, but the largest lynchings of anyone in America, including Vancouver at that point, was in San Francisco Chinatown and Los Angeles Chinatown when mobs of people went into Chinatown, burned it down, and lynched folks. That's not part of our history that people talk about a lot. People watching this film forgot about Vincent Chin and those kinds of stories. So I hope that we'll know those stories as a pathway for activism. And again, not forget that politics and legal change is at the core of some of these other changes to get us ready to have an AAPI president, a governor. Certainly we've had governors, and we can have a political science discussion of whether people do better in non-Asian districts and all that kind of stuff. But I think the bottom line is we're ready now, and we can't be an afterthought, and we're going to have to fight for it because it is zero sum. And I'm from Los Angeles, so I wanted to mention this because I don't know if it's getting the attention around the country, but redistricting, for example, is really controlling who gets what seat. And and this racism that came out in these private discussions, some of these are structural. If you think about it, no one should be drawing their own lines wherever you are in this country, right? You should not draw your own lines. So those are structural changes that it may take legal action, but yeah, we should take that out of the hands that are representing each other. Is take that out of the hands of the people there, out of the incumbents, and hopefully that would open it up. But in that discussion, I think APIs are almost invisible, even here in Los Angeles, about that discussion on redistricting. So it might take legal action. I don't know. But there are some basic things that we can put in structurally, whether it's having nonpartisan, non-elected bodies help draw these lines. Yeah.
Sure. Well, you're singing our song. The earlier discussion that we had today was also about, one of the topics was redistricting in New York City and in New York State. But I just had one last question, and then maybe we can have some questions from the audience through the mic, and I can just telegraph the questions to you if that would work. But my question to you, Ron, is, this is, and I know you've discussed this with Chris Kwok, but kind of the East Coast, West Coast, right, dynamic. Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders often talk about, for those who talk about these things, that the West Coast is kind of further along than the East Coast for whatever reasons. And so I was wondering if you had any thoughts about that, and also any advice that you could give for folks who, on the East Coast or Midwest or the American South, the Rockies, but who really kind of want to push out with this to make sure that, as you say, that the nation is ready for this moment.
Right. I think New York seemed to me to be right behind California in terms of representation, but I think it has to be taken even at a more micro level, because if you look at San Francisco, for example, which has a lot of Chinese Americans historically, not historically, but more recently in the last 20 years, they have mayor, they have city attorney now, a lot of people on their board of supervisors, but they don't have Filipino Americans, right? And Filipino Americans are the second largest in San Francisco proper. So I think you have to really look at it, break it down by area, not only area, big geographic, but smaller areas. But I think the core of it is the infrastructure that communities are building, right? And I think in this moment of API hate, we see a lot of organic API groups across the country of people that haven't been active before. And that can be a basis of organizing, right? Because that kind of organization is what it takes to get out the vote, raise money, walk door to door. And those kind of really basic things can't be underestimated in terms of getting the fair representation. And my cursory, I know New York is farther along than most of this country is in terms of where APIs are. And it's a matter of the history of activism, right? New York has a strong history of activism, but in some areas like Texas, where it's happening, right, because of organizing. And, we can't diminish the power of grassroots organizing and then connecting that to politics, because without the political power, there's a lot of frustration. And one thing I will say, because we talk about this here in California, for the budget, we have a budget chair, and they were able to get, I think, $300 million or $30 million for API hate put into the state budget. So that, that's almost like what we could do with that power. New York could be in a similar situation. I don't know how much, if anything, was allocated through the state, but that's how we can hold our electeds accountable. And then let's see where that money goes and how it can really impact our community. So I think it's about educating people that activism leads to actual gains if we want it to and if we fight for it. Yeah.
Fantastic. I was wondering if there were questions from the audience. Mac will bring, I will leave that to Mac. Yeah.
Just one question. Where do we go from here? Some of the footage I saw was disturbing. It looked like the dudes with attitudes versus the Four Horsemen. It also looked like Wrestle 92 War Games.
Could you hear the question, Ron? The question is, where do we go from here?
Right. That's the key question, right? What is the hope for the future? And I think hopefully I've alluded to some of it. It's like we have to take the organizations that are being built that are trying to respond to this hate and politicize them, frankly, and start a movement at the grassroots level. And that movement has to be among different people of color. It can't just be Asians for Asians or whatever the key is. I think this film, because we only had an hour, focused on the API community, right, to tell our story. But I think it's important that we have to find the issues that bring us together. And there are so many, whether that's fighting against hate, crime, street level homelessness, economic development, all of the things that our communities share, but fighting for the political power, sharing power, and getting the resources to make change, right? I think what is the biggest enemy that we faced, and within the API community, we're not active. We're apathetic because I think it's part of the immigrant story, in particular, the API story. Is like, and I was told this when I was growing up, why be active? You just put your head down, you don't get noticed, you do hard work, you study hard. But I think a lot of APIs, especially in this current environment, are seeing that doesn't stop you from getting attacked in the street or your grocery store robbed or all of those other things. So, those kinds of things, staying active, and at least in the API community, it's the vigilance to be active. And then I think the next step is, how do we find coalitions that we could work together on these issues?
Fantastic. So is there another question? I think, and yeah, okay.
Question for you, Ron, as well as Vivian and Chris, and the legacy that we have coming down the pike. Do you individuals really understand that you are creating the solution by doing what you're doing?
Ron, do you want to take it?
Well, first of all, thank you. Thank you so much for that. I think this has been really a labor of love. I mean, this was a volunteer effort by most everyone except for the director, because he was a professional film person. But it wasn't really a response to Trump and the pandemic and seeing what would happen to our community. So if it has and can affect people and can help organize them and focus them and get them more politically active, or at a minimum, learning our own history, whether Asians learning their own history or other folks and sharing that history, then that's a great thing. And it's been worth all the blood, sweat, and tears and the hours to put this together then. And I hope as many eyeballs in the world get to see this. And thank you so much to the folks that put this on today, Chris and others that were that. And we're going to be back to New York. We're going to do some more stuff. So, yeah.
That's great. We're not quite over yet, but Chris, do you want to respond to the question?
Yeah, no, I hope that we are, and I think the whole point is to stir the pot and to roll up the sleeves and do the work, because I think the work happens when you don't even realize it. You're trying to find the answer. You don't know the answer. You don't know what the next step is, but you're going to get out there and then see who comes out, who shows up. And I think as a young person, I heard these things, but without the lived experience, I had a hard time understanding it. And I had to go through, like much of life, you hear things from your elders and people you listen and you learn from, and then you try to put that into practice. And so a lot of it is about feeling the stones as you go through the creek. So, and we're living, as I said earlier, in a critical moment for our country and for APIs, and I think we just need to be at the table, in the mix, whatever metaphor we want to use, in order to make sure it goes the right way. And
yeah. So I'll just also say that one thing I learned from Chris, right, in just speaking with him, that it's just important to show up. Even if you really don't know what you're doing, I'll paraphrase, at first, you just show up. Pretty soon you're gonna get to know, right? Mac, I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions and then we'll wrap.
Hi. I was just wondering what the next steps were with the film. Can we bring it to the Chinese community? I'm active in the Chinese community, so is Doris Ling here. I'd like to see Doris be our Jesse Jackson, our Al Sharpton. She's been very active, but I'd like to see us way more active. I'm Frances Wong. I work at New York Presbyterian. I'm the director of the Asian Health Institute. In health, I'm very active, and I've been very active lately. Actually, the last 9 months I haven't been, but when we were trying to get the mayor elected, I was more active. But I'd like to see this film post in Chinatown so Asians, the Chinese can be more active. They're very, very subdued. And Chris has been really wonderful. Vivian, like to see more people here.
We'll make it happen.
Oh, great. Good. Let's do it.
Any more questions? Yep, there's some hands. And then in the back after that, if that's okay.
I think this is great. You know, the documentary is fantastic, and I think there's a lot of issues that are coming out. But in terms of the West Coast, East Coast problem, I feel like New York City may have a lot of Asians, but I live up in Western Massachusetts next to upstate New York, and everyone, it's very Trump country up there, and there are no Asians. And so no matter how much we try to speak up and, you know, get as many voices out there, we are a minority. And I think that is a reality that we have to face and figure out, how does a tiny minority get heard? Because there's no way we can, you know, outnumber any of these groups. Any ideas?
I mean, I think that it's instructive for me to look at the struggles of African Americans, look at the organizing of Jewish Americans or Jews in America, right? I mean, that I just steal from their playbook, and because that has made so much, you know, given us so much progress, right? And then we take the lessons and then we adapt them. You know, Asians or the Chinese and then the Japanese and the Filipinos were there at the creation of California. You know, they were suppressed. They are a huge part of California history. They made California possible. You know, we don't talk about it that way, but they did. But then they were suppressed and kept from enjoying the riches of California as it became what it is. But they helped made it what it is. New York is an older state. The power structures and institutions were very much set by the time that the Asians were here. So it's different. We got a lot of numbers. You know, they're involved in different ways. It's okay. That's just countries. Our country is a big country, big history, different regional histories, right? We understand that, and then we work to build and to fill in the missing links where we are. That's it. We can't do any more than that. You know, anything more, it'd be like a Superman, Superwoman. You can't do that. Just do what you can do where you are. So, I mean, that's how I see the work. I think there's.
Yeah, Ron, did you want to interject, or you don't have to?
I would just say yes. You have to work together across lines, racial lines, ethnic lines, gender lines, socioeconomic lines, because you know, if every community just was fighting for their own, right, then it has to be based on the principle. And I hope the moment in time now, no one would stand up, not against, you know, you have to fight this racism and hate and violence, right? And no community is going to do it alone. You know, the civil rights movement was a coalition movement. That's our history in America, you know, to fight the principles. And, you know, Trump, and it's the last stand. And so that's why these cleavages are so dynamic, because the demographic change is happening at a pace where, you know, those that are fighting change are going to be in a minority just by the numbers.
Great. I think there's one last question, and then I'm going to close. Yeah. Right there. No. Yeah, that's right. Oh, yeah.
Sorry, I have a question regarding the movement of people from the cities to the suburbs. There was a part in the film about the individual that was attacked because he was Asian and the person that came to represent him. The Black community, of course, has had that problem where people would move out to the suburbs and then they'd have all these legal restrictive covenants about how they could move, and they'd be discriminated against in terms of their ability to get loans, in terms of ability to move into neighborhoods, et cetera, et cetera. Did the Asian community face a similar situation like that, where there were restrictive covenants, where they could not move into neighborhoods, where they couldn't get loans, and where the courts actually were also upholding those ideas that the Black community faced?
Yeah, you know, taking the example of Los Angeles, you know, the large number of Asians, there was a very small population of Asians in California because of immigration restriction to post-65. Post-65, the civil rights movement really launched a sea change in the law, and the federal government wanted to encourage encourage home ownership for minority populations, including blacks. It was really for African Americans, the struggles of the civil rights movement. But what it did was, LA, as you might know, is a city of suburbs bound together by highways. And the federal government, through its civil rights movements, encouraged banks. And there were Chinese people, there was 2 banks that began in the Chinese American community, East West Bank and Cathay, I think, that really financed, they just drove further down the freeway. They really financed home ownership. So many Asian Americans were able to not be bound by redlining because they had access to capital. But once again, and this is why we teach, we should remember the history and why that was possible. It was not just because the Chinese were so responsible and focused on home ownership, which they were, but they're also the larger legal, financial landscape changed because of civil rights. And so that's the kind of knowledge we should know. And quite honestly, as an adjunct at Hunter, I get to think and talk about this. So then I know, and then I make sure my students know. And we say, you know what, you were able to build wealth and home ownership because of civil rights. So let's just be grateful. Let's remember, and so that's what happened. And before those formal institutions, there were many informal lending networks. But previous to 65, the legal landscape did not allow home ownership or land ownership. And that was a large part of history in California for Asians and all 9 whites.
And also, of course, exclusion, right? Exclusion from, I often say to our students here, folks lived in the Chinatowns, the Japantowns, the Little Manilas, because they had no choice, because nobody else would welcome them, wanted them to live there. But I'm going to close now, if that's all right with the both of you. Thanks so much, Ron. I wanted to thank Ron and all our amazing speakers, Chris Kwok, for bringing this all to us, for the terrific longstanding support of President Raab at Hunter College, Harold Holzer, Basil Smikle, and I wanted to thank all the folks behind the scenes who work so hard to make these events look easy, and they are not easy. So I wanted to thank the impeccable Roosevelt House staff, Mac Barrett, Peter Scaflani, Aaron Lee Feynman, Daniel Culkin, who's up in the booth, Terry Rosendeutsch, Ann Lytle, Malky Schwartz, Milka Peregon, Christian Ramsey, Robert Laird, Joey Ma, and all our Asian American Studies faculty, students, alumni, everyone who joined us today. Thank you for joining us. If you're here in person, please join us for the reception after with gratitude. Thank you.